The windswept highlands of northern Britain bore witness to humanity's earliest permanent foothold in what would become Caledonian territory around 8000 BC, when the retreating ice sheets left behind a landscape of deep glens, towering peaks and fertile river valleys. The archaeological record reveals a gradual but profound transformation as nomadic hunter-gatherer bands evolved into settled communities that would lay the foundation for one of antiquity's most formidable warrior cultures. At Balbridie in Aberdeenshire, excavations have uncovered the remains of a massive timber hall dating to approximately 3800 BC, measuring 26 metres in length and 13 metres in width. The structure's post holes, still visible in the subsoil, indicate sophisticated carpentry techniques, using oak timbers that required coordinated effort from dozens of individuals. Carbonised grains of emmer wheat and barley found within the hall's confines provide tangible evidence of the agricultural revolution's arrival in the Northern Territories. These early farmers cleared patches of dense Caledonian forest, using polished stone axes, their blade marks still preserved on waterlogged timber fragments recovered from peat bogs across the highlands. The transition from mobile hunting bands to sedentary agricultural communities occurred gradually over several centuries, with archaeological evidence suggesting a mixed economy persisted well into the 3rd millennium BC. At Skara Brae on Orkney, dating to approximately 3200 BC, stone-built houses connected by covered passages reveal sophisticated architectural planning. The inhabitants crafted stone furniture, including beds, dressers, and storage boxes, while midden deposits contain the bones of red deer, cattle, sheep, and abundant fish remains. Similar settlement patterns emerged across the mainland highlands, though the acidic soils have preserved fewer organic materials than the alkaline conditions of Orkney. Neolithic communities established themselves along river valleys and coastal plains where fertile soils supported crop cultivation. The Kilmartin Valley in Argyll became a focal point for settlement and ritual activity, with over 350 ancient monuments concentrated within a 6-mile stretch. Linear arrangements of standing stones, burial cairns, and rock art panels suggest this landscape held profound spiritual significance for successive generations. Cup and ring marks carved into exposed rock faces display recurring geometric patterns that appear across Atlantic Europe, indicating cultural connections extending far beyond the immediate region. The arrival of metalworking technology around 2500 BC marked a revolutionary shift in Caledonian society. Early Bronze Age communities mastered the complex processes required to extract copper from ore deposits in the southern uplands and smelt it with imported tin to create bronze alloys. At Migdale in Sutherland, archaeologists have recovered bronze axes, daggers, and ornamental items that demonstrate sophisticated casting techniques. The distinctive Migdale Marnock tradition produced flat axes with splayed cutting edges particularly suited to woodworking, while curved daggers with pronounced midribs show clear influences from continental European designs. Bronze Age burial practices reveal increasingly stratified social hierarchies within Caledonian communities. The Forteviot Henge complex in Perthshire contains multiple burial sites spanning nearly a millennium of use. Excavations have revealed cremated remains interred with bronze daggers, jet necklaces and amber beads sourced from the Baltic region. One particularly rich burial contained a bronze dagger with a pommel decorated in gold leaf, accompanied by a wrist guard made from polished stone and archer's equipment, including flint arrowheads. Such grave goods indicate the emergence of elite warrior classes who controlled trade networks and accumulated prestige objects from distant regions. The construction of hill forts across Caledonian territories began during the later Bronze Age, reflecting both population growth and increasing territorial competition. These fortified settlements typically occupied prominent hilltops with commanding views over surrounding valleys and approach routes. At Traprain Law in East Lothian, archaeological evidence indicates continuous occupation from the late Bronze Age through the Roman period. The earliest defences consisted of timber palisades reinforced with stone ramparts, while later phases incorporated sophisticated entrance works with overlapping walls designed to channel attackers into killing zones. The internal organisation of Bronze Age hill forts reveals complex social structures within Caledonian communities. Excavations at Eildon Hill North near Melrose have uncovered the foundations of over 300 roundhouses arranged in distinct clusters, suggesting family or clan groupings within the larger settlement. The largest structures, positioned near the summit, contained evidence of metalworking activities including bronze casting furnaces and slag deposits. Smaller houses scattered across the hill fort's terrace slopes appear to have served residential functions, with central hearths and storage pits containing carbonised grain. Celtic cultural influences began penetrating northern Britain during the late Bronze Age, intensifying significantly after 800 BC with the advent of the Iron Age. The Latin artistic tradition, originating in Central Europe, introduced new decorative motifs and metalworking techniques that would profoundly influence Caledonian material culture. Excavations at Dunlagaid in Wester Ross have revealed iron swords with distinctive anthropomorphic hilts, characteristic of Latinian craftsmanship, while bronze mirrors decorated with intricate curvilinear patterns demonstrate the integration of continental artistic styles with local traditions. The process of Celtic cultural transmission involved both migration and cultural diffusion rather than wholesale population replacement. Linguistic evidence suggests Celtic languages gradually displaced earlier Pictish dialects through sustained contact and intermarriage between incoming groups and established communities. Archaeological assemblages from this transitional period display hybrid characteristics combining indigenous pottery traditions with imported metalwork styles and burial customs. Iron technology revolutionized Caledonian society by making superior weapons and tools accessible to broader segments of the population. Local bog iron deposits provided readily available raw materials, while improved smelting techniques allowed communities to achieve the high temperatures necessary for iron production. At Culbin Sands in Moray, excavations have uncovered ironworking sites with multiple furnaces capable of producing bloom iron that could be forged into weapons and agricultural implements. The proliferation of iron tools accelerated forest clearance and agricultural expansion, supporting larger populations in previously marginal areas. The emergence of distinct tribal identities during the later Iron Age reflected both geographic constraints and cultural developments within Caledonian society. Mountain ranges, river valleys, and coastal zones created natural territorial boundaries that encouraged the formation of discrete political units. The Grampian Mountains effectively divided northern Scotland into distinct regions, while major rivers like the Forth, Tay, and Spey served as both boundaries and communication routes between different tribal groups. Archaeological evidence indicates that tribal territories often centred on major hill forts that served as political and economic focal points. The massive stone-built fort at Taponoth in Aberdeenshire, situated at an elevation of 563 metres, commanded extensive views over the surrounding countryside and could accommodate large populations during times of conflict. Vitrified ramparts at this and similar sites demonstrate the use of timber-laced construction techniques that created formidable defensive barriers when subjected to intense heat. The development of specialised craft production within individual territories fostered trade relationships between different tribal groups while reinforcing distinct cultural identities. Pottery styles, metalwork traditions, and architectural techniques varied significantly between regions, suggesting limited population mobility and strong local traditions. The Votadini of southeastern Scotland developed distinctive wheel-thrown pottery with elaborate decorative schemes. while communities in the Western Isles maintained traditional hand-built ceramic traditions well into the Roman period. Territorial boundaries between emerging Caledonian tribes often followed natural features, but also reflected complex political and kinship relationships. The distribution of distinctive artifact types suggests that tribal territories were neither rigidly fixed nor mutually exclusive, with evidence for seasonal movement and resource sharing between neighbouring groups. Transhumance practices involving the seasonal movement of livestock to highland pastures created networks of interaction that transcended formal territorial boundaries while maintaining distinct group identities. The consolidation of tribal confederations during the final centuries BC represented the culmination of political developments that had been evolving for over a millennium. These larger political units combined multiple smaller tribes under common leadership structures while maintaining local autonomy in domestic affairs. The process involved both voluntary alliance formation and conquest, with successful war leaders expanding their influence through military prowess and strategic marriage alliances. Archaeological evidence for this political consolidation includes the construction of massive defensive works that required coordinated labour from multiple communities. The Antonine Wall frontier zone contains evidence for large-scale earthworks and timber constructions that could only have been undertaken by confederated tribal groups working under unified command. Similarly, the distribution of high-status metalwork and imported goods suggests the emergence of paramount chiefs who controlled extensive territories and trade networks. The sophisticated nature of late Iron Age Caledonian society is evident in the complexity of their settlement patterns and material culture. Crannogs, artificial islands constructed in lochs and rivers, provided secure bases for elite families while demonstrating advanced engineering capabilities. At Oakbank Crannog in Loch Tay, underwater excavations have revealed wooden structures preserved in anaerobic conditions, including turned wooden bowls, textile fragments, and even organic remains of food preparation. The site's occupants consumed a diverse diet, including beef, pork, venison, fish, and various plant foods, while craft activities included bronze working, textile production, and wood turning. The integration of Latin artistic traditions with indigenous Caledonian culture produced distinctive regional styles that would characterise northern British art for centuries. Stone sculpture began appearing during this period, with carved symbols and geometric patterns that would later develop into the sophisticated Pictish symbol stones. The Rhynie complex in Aberdeenshire has yielded early examples of figural stone carving, including representations of warriors and animals that demonstrate the emergence of a distinctive Caledonian artistic tradition. By the dawn of the Iron Age, Caledonian society had crystallised into a complex hierarchical structure that would define northern British culture for nearly 9 centuries. The sophisticated social organisation that emerged during this period reflected both indigenous developments and selective adoption of continental Celtic practices, creating a distinctive warrior culture that would prove remarkably resilient against external pressures. The apex of Caledonian society rested with the warrior aristocracy, whose authority derived from military prowess, control of agricultural surplus, and maintenance of extensive kinship networks. These elite families occupied the most defensible positions within hill forts and controlled access to imported luxury goods that reinforced their elevated status. Archaeological evidence from Craig Fadrig near Inverness reveals a central citadel area containing larger roundhouses with distinctive architectural features, including stone-lined storage pits, bronze-working hearths, and deposits of high-status metalwork. The recovery of Roman wine amphorae and Samian pottery from these contexts indicates that aristocratic households maintained trade connections, extending across the North Sea and into Gaul. Beneath the warrior elite, a substantial class of free farmers formed the backbone of Caledonian society. These households possessed their own land, livestock, and agricultural equipment, while owing military service and tribute payments to their aristocratic overlords. Excavations at Howe in Orkney have uncovered a typical farming settlement where multiple family units shared communal facilities including grain storage areas, metalworking spaces, and defensive works. The site's inhabitants practiced mixed agriculture, combining cereal cultivation with cattle and sheep herding, while seasonal hunting supplemented their diet with venison, wild boar, and waterfowl. Specialised craftsmen occupied an intermediate position within the social hierarchy, the skills essential for producing the weapons, jewellery, and ceremonial objects that defined aristocratic status. Master smiths commanded particular respect due to their ability to forge iron weapons and create the intricate metalwork that adorned elite warriors. At Jarlshof in Shetland, archaeological deposits spanning several centuries reveal the workshop areas of bronze and iron smiths who produced everything from simple agricultural tools to elaborate sword hilts decorated with Latin-inspired patterns. The presence of crucibles, tongs, and anvil stones alongside finished products indicates these craftsmen maintained permanent workshops within larger settlements. The Druids represented a distinct priestly class, whose influence extended far beyond religious matters into law, education, and political affairs. These learned men memorized vast bodies of oral tradition, including genealogies, legal precedents, astronomical knowledge, and ritual practices that bound Caledonian society together. Classical sources describe Druids as judges in legal disputes, advisors to chiefs, and keepers of sacred knowledge that required decades of training to master. Archaeological evidence for Druidical activity includes ritual deposits in natural springs and lochs, where bronze weapons, jewellery, and other valuable objects were deliberately deposited as offerings to supernatural forces. At the base of the social pyramid, a substantial population of unfree labourers worked the land and performed menial tasks within aristocratic households. These individuals included prisoners of war, debtors, and their descendants who lacked legal rights and could be bought, sold, or inherited as property. Evidence for their presence appears in the form of simple hut circles located on the periphery of major settlements, often lacking the defensive features and storage facilities associated with free farmers' dwellings. Clan structures provided the fundamental organisational framework within which these social classes operated. Each clan traced its descent from a common ancestor and maintained collective ownership of specific territories including agricultural land, grazing areas, and defensive positions. The clan chief, invariably drawn from the warrior aristocracy, exercised authority over all clan members while representing their interests in dealings with neighbouring groups. Kinship relationships extended through both paternal and maternal lines, creating complex networks of obligation and mutual support that could be activated during times of conflict or economic hardship. Marriage alliances between aristocratic families served crucial political functions by cementing relationships between different clans and tribal groups. These unions typically involved the exchange of valuable gifts including weapons, jewellery, livestock, and sometimes hostages who served as guarantees of good faith. Archaeological evidence from Gurnes Broch in Orkney includes deposits of high-status metalwork that may represent marriage gifts or dowry payments, while the site's complex internal organisation suggests it housed multiple family groups linked by kinship ties. Religious practices permeated every aspect of Caledonian society, reflecting a worldview that recognised no sharp distinction between sacred and secular activities. The natural landscape itself was imbued with spiritual significance, with particular reverence accorded to springs, groves, hilltops, and bodies of water where supernatural forces were believed to reside. Druids served as intermediaries between the human and divine realms, conducting elaborate ceremonies that maintained cosmic balance and ensured the continued prosperity of their communities. Sacred groves played central roles in Caledonian religious observance, providing secluded locations where druids could perform their most important rituals. Classical authors describe these woodland sanctuaries as places where human sacrifice occurred during times of crisis, though archaeological evidence for such practices remains limited. At Dunay in Ireland, excavations have revealed ritual deposits including animal bones, metalwork, and human remains that suggest complex ceremonial activities, though the precise nature of these practices remains debated among scholars. Stone circles constructed during earlier periods continue to serve important ceremonial functions throughout the Iron Age. The Ring of Brodgar in Orkney, originally erected during the Neolithic period, shows evidence for continued ritual use, including the deposition of animal bones and pottery fragments around individual stones. These monuments provided focal points for seasonal gatherings where multiple clans could come together for religious ceremonies, trade negotiations, and the resolution of legal disputes. Burial practices reflected both social hierarchies and religious beliefs about the afterlife. Elite warriors received elaborate interments that included their weapons, jewellery, and sometimes sacrificed animals or retainers. The Cairns near Inverness contained multiple burial chambers where cremated remains were interred with bronze weapons, gold ornaments, and exotic materials, including amber and jet. The careful positioning of these monuments in relation to astronomical phenomena suggests their builders possessed sophisticated knowledge of celestial cycles. Water held particular sacred significance in Caledonian religion, with lochs and rivers serving as portals to the other world where gods and ancestors resided. Ritual deposits in these aquatic contexts include thousands of bronze and iron weapons, jewellery, and ceremonial objects deliberately consigned to the depths. At Lyn Cerrig in Anglesey, underwater excavations have recovered over 150 metal objects spanning several centuries, including swords, spearheads, shield bosses, and chariot fittings that represent enormous accumulated wealth sacrificed to aquatic deities. The material culture of Iron Age Caledonians reflected both practical needs and aesthetic sensibilities that distinguished their craftsmanship from contemporary continental traditions. Weapons formed the most prestigious category of material goods, with swords serving as symbols of aristocratic status as much as functional fighting implements. Caledonian smiths developed distinctive blade patterns, including long slashing swords with anthropomorphic hilts and shorter thrusting weapons designed for close combat. The Battersea shield, though recovered from the Thames, exemplifies the sophisticated metalworking techniques employed by Celtic craftsmen, featuring repousse bronze decoration with red enamel inlays arranged in flowing curvilinear patterns. Spearheads represented the most common weapon type, varying in size from light javelins suitable for throwing to heavy thrusting spears designed for infantry combat. Archaeological deposits from Lyn in Wales include numerous spearheads showing the transition from bronze to iron technology, with early iron examples retaining bronze sockets and decorative elements. Caledonian spearheads often featured distinctive flame-shaped blades with pronounced midribs that provided both structural strength and visual impact. Shield construction employed both organic and metal components, with wooden or leather backing reinforced by bronze or iron fittings. The Wandsworth shield boss from the Thames demonstrates the elaborate decorative schemes applied to defensive equipment, featuring concentric circles of repousse bronzework with coral inlays. Similar shield bosses recovered from Scottish sites show local variations in decorative motifs, while maintaining the basic structural principles of continental Latin designs. Personal ornaments served important social functions by displaying wealth, status, and cultural affiliations. Torques, heavy neck rings twisted from bronze, silver, or gold, represented the most prestigious form of personal adornment. The Great Torque from Snettisham, weighing over 1 kilogram of gold and silver alloy, demonstrates the extraordinary skill of Celtic metalworkers in creating both functional and decorative objects. Scottish examples, though generally smaller, show similar attention to surface decoration, including twisted rope patterns and terminal ornaments featuring stylized animal heads. Brooches provided both functional and decorative purposes, serving to fasten clothing while displaying the wearer's artistic preferences and economic status. The development of the Latin brooch from earlier Hallstatt prototypes shows clear evolutionary progression, with Scottish examples incorporating local variations, including distinctive pin arrangements and decorative schemes. Bronze brooches from Traprain lore show continental influences adapted to local tastes, featuring enamel inlays and geometric patterns that would influence later Pictish artistic traditions. Pottery production reflected both utilitarian needs and aesthetic considerations, with regional variations indicating distinct cultural traditions within the broader Caledonian sphere. Wheel-thrown vessels appeared during the later Iron Age, though hand-built pottery continued alongside more sophisticated production techniques. The Votadini territory produced distinctive decorated wares featuring geometric patterns applied before firing, while Western regions maintained simpler ceramic traditions focusing on functional rather than decorative qualities. Settlement patterns during the Iron Age reflected both defensive considerations and economic requirements, with communities choosing locations that provided security while maintaining access to agricultural land and trade routes. Hill forts represented the most impressive category of defensive architecture, ranging from simple palisaded enclosures to massive stone-built fortifications that required enormous labour investments from multiple communities. The construction techniques employed in hill fort building demonstrate sophisticated understanding of defensive principles and available materials. Timber-laced ramparts, where horizontal logs were integrated into stone walls, provided flexible defensive barriers that could absorb impact while maintaining structural integrity. When these timber elements burned, either accidentally or deliberately, the intense heat could vitrify the stone components, creating the characteristic vitrified forts found across Scotland. Tapper Noath in Aberdeenshire preserves extensive areas of vitrified walling, where temperatures reached levels sufficient to fuse granite blocks into solid masses. Internal organisation within hill forts reveals complex social arrangements and specialised activity areas. At Eildon Hill North, archaeological surveys have identified over 300 house platforms arranged in distinct clusters that probably represented extended family groups or craft specialists. The central area contained larger structures associated with metalworking debris and imported goods, suggesting this zone housed the settlement's elite residents. Lower terraces accommodated smaller roundhouses with associated storage pits and cooking areas that served the general population. Entrance arrangements at major hill forts incorporated sophisticated defensive features designed to channel attackers into vulnerable positions. The entrance at Dundurn in Perthshire features overlapping ramparts that forced visitors to approach along a narrow passage overlooked by defensive positions. Guard chambers flanking the entrance provided shelter for defenders while allowing observation of approaching parties. Similar arrangements at other sites suggest these defensive principles were widely understood and consistently applied across Caledonian territories. Crannogs represented an alternative settlement strategy that combined defensive advantages with access to aquatic resources. These artificial islands, constructed in lochs and rivers using timber, stone and organic materials, provided secure bases for elite families while demonstrating considerable engineering expertise. Oakbank Crannog in Loch Tay preserves exceptional organic remains including wooden structures, textiles and food debris that illuminate daily life in these unique settlements. The inhabitants maintained causeways connecting their island to the shore, though these could be destroyed or submerged during times of danger. The strategic positioning of defensive sites reveals sophisticated understanding of territorial control and communication networks. Major hill forts typically occupied positions commanding important routeways, river crossings, or territorial boundaries where they could monitor movement and project power across surrounding landscapes. The distribution of these sites suggests coordinated planning at the tribal level, with individual fortifications positioned to provide mutual support during times of conflict. Smaller enclosed settlements, often termed duns or raths, provided defensive positions for individual extended families or small communities. These sites typically featured single ramparts, enclosing areas sufficient for a few roundhouses and associated outbuildings. Dun Telv in Glen Elgee preserves substantial stone walls reaching heights of over 10 metres, demonstrating the impressive scale of even relatively modest defensive works. The internal area contains foundations for several structures, including a large central roundhouse and smaller ancillary buildings that probably serve storage and craft functions. The systematic Roman advance into Caledonian territories began under Gnaeus Julius Agricola, whose appointment as governor of Britannia in 78 AD marked a decisive shift from the defensive consolidation that had characterized previous decades of Roman occupation. Agricola arrived with explicit instructions from Emperor Vespasian to complete the conquest of Britain, bringing with him reinforcements that swelled the provincial garrison to approximately 50,000 legionaries and auxiliaries. His methodical approach to northern expansion would establish the template for Roman frontier warfare, while providing the first detailed intelligence about Caledonian military capabilities and political organisation. The initial phase of Agricola's northern campaigns focused on securing the territory of the Votadini and Selgovae, tribes whose territories straddled the natural invasion routes leading into the highlands. Roman engineers constructed a series of temporary marching camps at regular intervals along these advance routes, each designed to accommodate specific unit sizes while providing secure overnight positions for advancing columns. The camp at Dalswinton in Dumfriesshire, excavated extensively during the 20th century, reveals the standardized construction techniques employed by Roman forces during this period. Its rectangular outline encompasses 5.7 hectares within a rampart and ditch system that required approximately 2,400 man-hours to complete, demonstrating the enormous logistical effort involved in supporting sustained military operations in hostile territory. Roman reconnaissance units, composed primarily of auxiliary cavalry drawn from Germanic and Gallic tribes, pushed deep into Caledonian territory during the campaigning seasons of 79 and 80 AD. These mounted scouts operated in small groups, typically numbering between 8 and 12 riders, tasked with gathering intelligence about tribal movements, settlement locations, and potential routes for larger formations. Their reports, compiled by Agricola's staff and later incorporated into Tacitus's biographical account, provide the earliest detailed descriptions of Caledonian military organisation and tactical preferences. The Caledonians responded to these initial incursions with a sophisticated defensive strategy that exploited their intimate knowledge of local terrain while avoiding direct confrontation with superior Roman forces. Rather than attempting to hold fixed positions against overwhelming odds, Caledonian warbands employed hit-and-run tactics designed to harass Roman supply lines and isolate detached units. These operations typically involved rapid strikes against foraging parties, baggage trains and construction details working on temporary fortifications, followed by immediate withdrawal into difficult terrain where Roman cavalry could not effectively pursue. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals the extent of Roman intelligence gathering efforts in the form of temporary observation posts established on prominent hilltops throughout southern Scotland. The site at Eildon Hill North shows clear evidence for Roman occupation during the early 80s AD, including pottery fragments, metalwork and construction debris that indicate a substantial garrison maintained this position for several months. The commanding views from this 422-metre summit provided Roman observers with surveillance over the Tweed Valley and surrounding tribal territories. while signal fires could relay information rapidly to supporting units positioned along the main advance routes. Caledonian military organisation during this period reflected centuries of warfare against neighbouring tribes combined with recent adaptations designed to counter Roman tactical advantages. The basic fighting unit consisted of the warband, typically numbering between 100 and 300 warriors drawn from a single clan or allied family groups. These formations combined heavily armed infantry, equipped with long swords and spears, with lighter troops carrying javelins and small shields designed for skirmishing. The archaeological record from sites like Traprain Law reveals caches of weapons that were probably maintained for rapid distribution during military emergencies, including iron spearheads, sword blades, and shield fittings that demonstrate standardized production techniques. The warrior culture that dominated Caledonian society placed enormous emphasis on individual combat prowess and the accumulation of martial honours through successful raids and battles. Young men achieved adult status through participation in cattle raids against neighbouring tribes, while established warriors maintained their reputations through displays of courage in combat and generous distribution of captured wealth. This cultural framework proved remarkably adaptable to the challenges posed by Roman expansion, as traditional raiding techniques could be readily applied to harassment of Roman forces, while the existing command structures provided effective coordination for larger military operations. Caledonian weapons technology during the early contact period reflected both indigenous traditions and selective adoption of Roman innovations observed through trade and warfare. Archaeological deposits from Burnswalk Hill in Dumfriesshire, the site of intensive military activity during this period, include numerous iron projectile points that show clear Roman influence in their design and construction. These findings suggest Caledonian smiths were rapidly adapting their production techniques to create weapons specifically designed for anti-Roman warfare, including heavy javelins capable of penetrating Roman armour and specialised arrowheads designed for use against cavalry targets. The emergence of Calgacus as a prominent war leader during this period represents the culmination of political developments that had been evolving within Caledonian society for generations. Classical sources describe him as commanding authority over multiple tribal groups, suggesting he had successfully navigated the complex kinship networks and alliance systems that governed intertribal relationships. His ability to coordinate military operations across such a wide geographical area indicates sophisticated communication networks and logistical capabilities that Roman intelligence initially underestimated. The political organisation that enabled Calgacus to achieve such widespread influence reflected traditional Caledonian institutions adapted to meet the unprecedented threat posed by Roman expansion. Tribal assemblies, normally convened only for major legal disputes or seasonal religious ceremonies, began meeting regularly to coordinate military planning and resource allocation. Archaeological evidence from major hill forts during this period shows increased activity in metalworking areas, with weapon production reaching levels that could only have been sustained through coordinated effort from multiple communities. Roman diplomatic efforts during the early phases of the campaign followed established patterns developed through decades of frontier warfare in Gaul and Germany. Agricola dispatched envoys to individual tribal leaders offering favourable terms for voluntary submission, including guarantees of local autonomy, reduced tribute obligations, and incorporation of tribal elites into the Roman administrative system. These negotiations typically involve the exchange of hostages, with prominent tribal members residing at Roman headquarters, while Roman officials lived among the tribes as guarantees of good faith. The limited success of these diplomatic initiatives reflected both Caledonian political structures and their previous experiences with Roman expansion elsewhere in Britain. Unlike the more centralised tribal kingdoms of southern Britain, Caledonian society remained organised around kinship groups that made collective decision-making extremely complex. individual chiefs who might have been inclined to accept Roman terms faced pressure from clan assemblies and druidical advisors who viewed any accommodation with the invaders as cultural betrayal. Roman fort construction during the initial phases of the northern campaigns established a network of permanent bases designed to control key strategic points while providing secure supply depots for continued operations. The fortress at Inchtooth Hill, begun during the 83 AD campaign season, represents the most ambitious of these construction projects. Designed to accommodate an entire legion plus auxiliary units, the site required the movement of thousands of tons of timber and stone. While Roman engineers diverted the River Tay to provide water supplies and eliminate potential approach routes for Caledonian attackers. The scale of construction activity at Inchtooth Hill demonstrates the enormous logistical effort required to maintain Roman forces in hostile territory. Archaeological excavations have revealed workshops for metalworking, leather processing and weapon maintenance, while granaries capable of storing supplies for several thousand men indicate planning for extended occupation. The discovery of over 875,000 iron nails buried in a single pit when the fortress was abandoned provides tangible evidence of the resources invested in this forward position. Caledonian responses to Roman fort construction evolved rapidly as tribal leaders recognized the strategic implications of permanent Roman presence in their territories. Rather than attempting direct assaults against heavily fortified positions, Caledonian forces focused on interdicting supply convoys and construction materials, moving between established bases and forward positions. These operations required careful coordination between multiple tribal groups and demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Roman logistical vulnerabilities. The intelligence networks developed by both sides during this period reveal the complexity of information warfare in ancient frontier conflicts. Roman commanders relied heavily on auxiliary units recruited from previously conquered British tribes, whose linguistic abilities and cultural knowledge proved invaluable for interpreting Caledonian intentions and capabilities. Conversely, Caledonian leaders maintained extensive spy networks among Romanized British communities, gathering information about Roman military planning and political developments that might affect the northern campaigns. Archaeological evidence for these intelligence operations appears in the form of Roman military equipment, recovered from Caledonian sites, suggesting either successful ambushes of Roman units or deliberate provisioning of tribal forces by sympathetic elements within the Roman military. The discovery of Roman cavalry equipment at Burnswalk Hill, including bronze horse harness fittings and iron spear points, indicates Caledonian forces had achieved significant tactical successes against Roman mounted units during the early phases of the conflict. The seasonal nature of ancient warfare imposed significant constraints on both Roman and Caledonian military operations during this period. Roman forces typically initiated major campaigns during late spring when improved weather conditions facilitated movement of heavy baggage trains and siege equipment. Caledonian responses followed complementary patterns, with major tribal gatherings scheduled to coincide with Roman campaign seasons, while winter months were devoted to weapon production, alliance building and recruitment of additional warriors from allied tribes. The geographical challenges posed by highland terrain forced significant modifications to standard Roman tactical procedures during northern operations. The broken topography that characterized much of Caledonian territory prevented effective deployment of large infantry formations, while limiting cavalry operations to narrow valley floors and coastal plains. Roman engineers responded by developing specialized equipment and techniques for mountain warfare, including portable bridges for river crossings and modified artillery pieces capable of transport across difficult terrain. Caledonian exploitation of terrain advantages during this period demonstrates sophisticated understanding of tactical principles and careful observation of Roman operational methods. Tribal forces consistently chose battlefields that negated Roman advantages in heavy infantry and cavalry, while maximizing opportunities for ambush and rapid withdrawal. The effectiveness of these tactics forced Roman commanders to modify their approach to frontier warfare, abandoning the rapid conquest strategies that had proven successful in Gaul and Germany in favour of methodical advance supported by extensive fortification networks. The economic impact of sustained military operations began affecting both Roman and Caledonian societies during the early 80s AD. Roman military expenditures in Britain consumed enormous resources that strained imperial finances while diverting troops and equipment from other frontier zones. Archaeological evidence from Roman sites during this period shows increased reliance on local production for military supplies, with workshops within major fortresses producing everything from pottery and metalwork to leather goods and textiles. Caledonian communities faced equally severe economic disruptions as prolonged warfare diverted manpower from agricultural activities, while Roman operations destroyed crops and livestock across wide areas. The concentration of population within major hill forts during this period placed enormous strain on food supplies and sanitation systems, while the demands of weapon production exhausted local iron ore deposits and required importation of raw materials from distant sources. The culmination of Agricola's northern campaigns arrived during the summer of 83 AD when Caledonian forces under Calgacus assembled in unprecedented numbers to face the Roman advance. The precise location of this decisive encounter has generated scholarly debate for centuries, with archaeological evidence supporting various sites throughout the Scottish Highlands. The most compelling arguments centre on three primary locations: Benachie in Aberdeenshire, the Gask Ridge in Perthshire, and the Pass of Grange near Keith in Moray. Benachie presents the strongest archaeological case for the battle site, with extensive Roman military remains discovered across the surrounding landscape. The hill itself rises to 528 metres above sea level, providing commanding views across the fertile plains of Aberdeenshire while offering multiple approach routes for large military formations. Excavations at nearby Durno have revealed the remains of a massive Roman marching camp capable of accommodating Agricola's entire army, measuring approximately 144 acres within its defensive perimeter. The camp's distinctive playing card shape and standardised gateway arrangements match descriptions of temporary fortifications constructed during major campaign operations. The Gask Ridge location draws support from the concentration of Roman watchtowers and small forts that extend northward from the legionary fortress at Inchtuthil. This defensive line, representing the most northerly permanent Roman installations in Scotland, suggests sustained military activity in the region during the relevant period. Archaeological surveys have identified at least 16 watchtowers spaced at regular intervals along the ridge, each positioned to maintain visual contact with neighbouring installations, while providing early warning of Caledonian movements from the north. The Pass of Grange theory rests primarily on topographical analysis of Tacitus's battlefield description, which emphasises the enclosed nature of the fighting space and the presence of wooded hills surrounding the combat zone. This narrow valley, flanked by steep slopes covered in ancient oak and birch forests, would have severely constrained Roman cavalry operations, while providing Caledonian forces with multiple withdrawal routes into difficult terrain. Recent metal detector surveys in the area have recovered scattered finds of Roman military equipment, though these remains could equally represent routine patrol activities rather than major battle debris. Regardless of the specific location, the strategic situation preceding the battle reveals careful planning by both commanders as they manoeuvred for tactical advantage across the Highland landscape. Agricola had spent the previous winter consolidating his supply lines and reinforcing key positions along his extended communications network. Roman engineers constructed additional granaries at major bases while establishing forward supply depots that could sustain operations deep in hostile territory. The logistical preparations included stockpiling of siege equipment, medical supplies, and specialised mountain warfare gear designed for highland conditions. Calgacus faced equally complex organisational challenges as he coordinated the assembly of tribal contingents from across northern Scotland. Archaeological evidence from major hill forts during this period shows intensive weapon production and food preparation activities that suggest communities were mobilising their entire military potential for the coming confrontation. The Tapper Noath site in Aberdeenshire reveals evidence for large-scale metalworking operations, with dozens of furnaces producing iron spearheads, sword blades, and other military equipment at unprecedented rates. The composition of Agricola's army at Mons Graupius reflected the multi-ethnic character of Roman frontier forces during the Flavian period. The core of his formation consisted of elements from 3 legions, the 2nd Augusta, 9th Hispana, and 20th Valeria Victrix, totalling approximately 15,000 heavily armed infantry. These legionaries carried standardised equipment including the gladius short sword, pilum javelin, scutum shield, and lorica segmentata armour that had proven devastatingly effective in previous frontier campaigns. Auxiliary units provided crucial tactical flexibility and specialised capabilities that regular legionary forces lacked. Batavian cohorts, recruited from Germanic tribes along the Rhine frontier, brought expertise in river crossings and amphibious operations that proved valuable during Highland campaigns. Tungrian infantry units contributed mountain warfare experience gained through service in the Alps and Pyrenees, while their knowledge of Celtic languages facilitated intelligence gathering and prisoner interrogation. The cavalry component of Agricola's army included both regular auxiliary alay and specialised units recruited from recently conquered British tribes. The Ala Petriana, originally raised in Gaul but reinforced with British recruits, provided heavy cavalry capable of charging formed infantry while maintaining sufficient mobility for pursuit operations. Lighter cavalry units drawn from Thracian and Pannonian tribes served reconnaissance and skirmishing functions, operating in small groups to gather intelligence and harass enemy formations. Caledonian military organisation at Mons Graupius represented the largest tribal confederation ever assembled in northern Britain, with Tacitus estimating their total strength at over 30,000 warriors. This massive force combined traditional clan-based warbands with more recently developed tactical formations designed specifically for anti-Roman warfare. The core of Calgicus's army consisted of heavily armed infantry equipped with long iron swords, wooden shields reinforced with bronze or iron fittings, and thrusting spears that could match Roman pila in reach and penetrating power. The diversity of weapons recovered from contemporary archaeological contexts reveals the varied tactical roles within Caledonian formations. Excavations at Burnswalk Hill have yielded numerous iron spearheads, ranging from light javelins suitable for skirmishing to heavy infantry spears designed for close combat. The presence of specialised anti-cavalry weapons, including long pikes and barbed javelins, indicates Caledonian smiths had adapted their production to counter specific Roman tactical advantages. Caledonian shield construction during this period shows clear Roman influence while maintaining traditional decorative elements that reinforce tribal identity. Archaeological fragments from sites like Traprain Law reveal wooden shields with iron or bronze reinforcement strips arranged in geometric patterns. The distinctive oval shape favoured by many Caledonian warriors provided better protection for mounted combat, while maintaining sufficient manoeuvrability for individual duelling that remained central to Celtic military culture. The battle itself unfolded across multiple phases as both commanders adapted their tactics to changing battlefield conditions. Agricola initially deployed his forces in traditional Roman formation, with legionary cohorts forming the centre, while auxiliary infantry extended the flanks. The cavalry remained in reserve, positioned to exploit any breakthrough or pursue retreating enemies. This conservative deployment reflected Roman tactical doctrine while accounting for the uncertain terrain and enemy capabilities. Calgicus arranged his forces to maximize their numerical advantage while exploiting the natural defensive features of the chosen battlefield. The Caledonian front line consisted of their most experienced warriors, veterans of previous encounters with Roman forces who understood the importance of maintaining formation cohesion against disciplined infantry attacks. Behind this initial formation, successive lines of tribal contingents provided depth while ensuring that fresh warriors could replace casualties without disrupting the overall battle line. The opening phase of combat featured extensive skirmishing as light infantry from both sides tested enemy positions and sought tactical advantages. Caledonian slingers and javelin throwers, operating from concealed positions among rocks and scrub vegetation, inflicted significant casualties on Roman auxiliary units advancing to contact. These preliminary exchanges revealed the effectiveness of Caledonian missile weapons, with archaeological evidence suggesting they employed both traditional stone projectiles and specialized iron-pointed javelins designed to penetrate Roman armor. Roman artillery played a crucial role during the initial engagement, with ballistae and scorpiones providing suppressive fire against Caledonian positions while clearing approach routes for advancing infantry. The psychological impact of these mechanical weapons proved as important as their direct casualties, as the unfamiliar sound and devastating effects of bolt throwers disrupted Caledonian formations and forced tactical adjustments. Archaeological recovery of Roman artillery bolts from highland sites demonstrates the extensive use of these weapons during northern campaigns. The decisive phase of the battle began when Agricola committed his auxiliary cohorts to a frontal assault while simultaneously launching cavalry attacks against the Caledonian flanks. This coordinated assault exploited Roman advantages in training and equipment, while preventing Caledonian forces from concentrating their superior numbers at any single point. The auxiliary infantry, fighting in close formation with short swords and large shields, proved devastatingly effective against Caledonian warriors accustomed to more individualistic combat styles. Caledonian tactical responses during the main engagement reveal sophisticated understanding of battlefield dynamics and careful preparation for anti-Roman warfare. Rather than meeting the Roman assault with static defence, Calgicus ordered controlled withdrawals that drew Roman formations into increasingly difficult terrain, while maintaining the integrity of his battle line. This tactical flexibility prevented the complete collapse that had characterized previous tribal defeats, while maximizing casualties among pursuing Roman units. The role of terrain in determining the battle's outcome cannot be overstated, as the chosen battlefield channeled Roman tactical advantages while providing Caledonian forces with multiple options for tactical maneuver. The presence of wooded hills and broken ground prevented effective deployment of Roman cavalry in their traditional shock role, while offering concealment for Caledonian reserves and withdrawal routes that could not be effectively blocked by pursuing enemies. Tacitus's account of the battle, while providing the most detailed contemporary description of the engagement, reflects both the strengths and limitations of Roman historical writing during this period. His access to official reports and eyewitness accounts from participants provides authentic details about tactical developments and casualty figures that would otherwise be lost to history. The famous speech attributed to Calgicus, with its denunciation of Roman imperialism and defense of Caledonian freedom, demonstrates Tacitus's literary skill while reflecting genuine understanding of barbarian motivations and grievances. The potential biases in Tacitus's narrative stem from both his personal relationship with Agricola and the broader cultural assumptions that shaped Roman attitudes toward barbarian peoples. His portrayal of Caledonian courage and military effectiveness serves partly to magnify Roman achievements while conforming to literary conventions that demanded worthy opponents for heroic protagonists. The emphasis on Caledonian tactical sophistication and unified command structure may reflect Roman propaganda needs rather than accurate intelligence about tribal military organization. Archaeological evidence provides crucial correctives to literary sources while confirming many details of Tacitus's account. The distribution of Roman military equipment across highland sites demonstrates the extent of combat operations while revealing the effectiveness of Caledonian resistance efforts. Weapon caches discovered at major hill forts show evidence for hasty concealment, suggesting rapid Roman advances that forced tribal forces to abandon prepared positions and retreat into more remote areas. The immediate aftermath of Mons Graupius revealed the limitations of decisive battle as a tool for permanent conquest in frontier regions characterized by dispersed populations and difficult terrain. While Roman forces achieved tactical victory and inflicted severe casualties on Caledonian formations, the survivors melted away into the highland landscape, where conventional military operations could not effectively pursue them. This pattern of tactical defeat, followed by strategic persistence, would characterize Caledonian resistance for centuries to come. Roman casualty figures from the battle, while significantly lower than Caledonian losses, still represented substantial depletion of irreplaceable veteran units operating far from their recruitment bases. The loss of experienced centurions and auxiliary officers proved particularly damaging to Roman capabilities, as these individuals possessed the tactical knowledge and leadership skills essential for effective frontier warfare. Medical facilities at Roman bases during this period show evidence for treating large numbers of wounded personnel, indicating the intensity of combat even in a victorious engagement. The political ramifications of Mons Graupius extended far beyond the immediate military consequences, fundamentally altering the strategic balance between Roman expansion efforts and Caledonian resistance capabilities. For Rome, the victory validated Agricola's aggressive northern policy while demonstrating the feasibility of highland conquest, given sufficient resources and sustained political support. The capture of significant numbers of Caledonian prisoners provided valuable intelligence about tribal organization and settlement patterns that would inform future military planning. Caledonian responses to their defeat revealed the resilience of tribal political structures and the adaptability of their military organization to changing strategic circumstances. Rather than fragmenting into competing factions or seeking individual accommodations with Roman authorities, the surviving tribal leaders maintained their confederation while adapting their tactics to avoid future decisive engagements. This strategic adjustment reflected sophisticated understanding of Roman military capabilities and the recognition that traditional Celtic warfare methods required fundamental modification to remain effective against disciplined professional armies. The impact on tribal unity following Mons Graupius demonstrates the complex relationship between military defeat and political cohesion in Celtic societies. While some peripheral tribes may have sought separate accommodations with Roman forces, the core Caledonian Confederation remained intact under leaders who had learned valuable lessons about Roman tactical methods and strategic objectives. This continuity of resistance leadership ensured that future Roman operations would face organized opposition rather than the fragmented tribal groups that had characterized earlier phases of the conquest. The immediate aftermath of Mons Graupius witnessed a fundamental transformation in Caledonian military doctrine as surviving tribal leaders recognized the futility of confronting Roman legions in pitched battles. The scattered remnants of Calgicus's confederation withdrew into the remote glens and mountain fastnesses where Roman heavy infantry could not effectively operate, initiating a prolonged period of guerrilla warfare that would test Roman resolve for decades. This strategic adaptation drew upon centuries of intertribal raiding experience while incorporating hard-learned lessons about Roman tactical capabilities and logistical vulnerabilities. Archaeological evidence from hill forts across the highlands reveals the systematic abandonment of major defensive positions in favour of smaller, more dispersed strongholds that could support limited numbers of warriors while remaining concealed from Roman reconnaissance. The massive fortification at Tapo Noth shows clear evidence of deliberate dismantling during this period, with valuable iron tools and weapons removed before the site's abandonment. Similar patterns appear at other major centres, suggesting coordinated planning rather than panicked flight following military defeat. The transition to guerrilla tactics required fundamental changes in Caledonian military organisation and equipment. Traditional warbands of several hundred warriors proved too large and cumbersome for effective hit-and-run operations, leading to the development of smaller raiding parties typically numbering between 20 and 50 men. These units drew their membership from multiple clans, creating mixed formations that could operate across traditional territorial boundaries, while maintaining the kinship bonds essential for unit cohesion and mutual trust. Weapon production shifted dramatically to emphasize portability and versatility over the impressive but unwieldy swords and spears that had dominated earlier periods. Archaeological deposits from this era show increased production of lighter spearheads suitable for throwing, while sword lengths decreased to facilitate movement through dense vegetation and confined spaces. The metalworking sites at Culbin Sands reveal evidence for specialized javelin points with barbed heads designed to inflict maximum damage on lightly armoured Roman auxiliaries while remaining embedded in shields and equipment to reduce their effectiveness. Caledonian raiders developed sophisticated intelligence networks that provided advance warning of Roman movements while identifying vulnerable targets for attack. These information systems relied heavily on civilian populations, who maintained normal agricultural activities while secretly observing Roman installations and troop movements. Women and children proved particularly valuable as intelligence assets, as Roman soldiers typically ignored their presence while conducting routine patrols and supply operations. The effectiveness of these intelligence networks becomes apparent through analysis of Roman military correspondence and archaeological evidence from attacked installations. Caledonian raids consistently targeted the most vulnerable elements of Roman operations, including isolated outposts, supply convoys travelling predictable routes, and construction parties working on fortifications. The precision of these attacks indicates detailed knowledge of Roman schedules, unit strengths, and defensive preparations that could only have been obtained through systematic espionage. Roman responses to guerrilla warfare evolved slowly as commanders trained in conventional tactics struggled to adapt their methods to unconventional threats. Initial efforts focused on increasing patrol frequency and establishing additional watchtowers to provide early warning of Caledonian movements. The gas grid system expanded during this period, with the construction of smaller signal stations positioned to maintain visual contact across increasingly wide frontages, though these installations proved vulnerable to night attacks that eliminated isolated garrisons before reinforcements could respond. The logistical challenges posed by guerrilla warfare forced significant modifications to Roman supply procedures and base construction. Traditional supply convoys travelling fixed routes at regular intervals provided predictable targets for Caledonian ambush parties, leading to the development of irregular schedules and varied routing that complicated both Roman planning and enemy interdiction efforts. Archaeological evidence from Roman supply bases shows increased storage capacity during this period, reflecting the need to maintain larger reserves when regular resupply became unreliable. Caledonian tactical innovations during this period demonstrate remarkable adaptability and creative problem-solving in response to Roman countermeasures. The development of coordinated multi-point attacks stretched Roman response capabilities while preventing effective concentration of defensive forces. Archaeological evidence from Burns Walk Hill revealed simultaneous attacks on multiple Roman positions, with projectile distributions indicating carefully planned assault sequences designed to maximize confusion and prevent mutual support between neighboring installations. The use of fire as a tactical weapon became increasingly sophisticated as Caledonian raiders learned to exploit Roman vulnerabilities to incendiary attacks. Wooden palisades, thatched roofs and stored supplies provided numerous targets for arson, while the dry conditions common during summer campaign seasons created ideal conditions for spreading fires. Roman engineering responses included increased use of stone construction and the development of fire breaks around critical installations, though these measures required enormous labour investments that strained available manpower. Tribal reorganisation following Mons Graupius reflected both immediate military necessities and longer-term political adaptations to sustained Roman pressure. The traditional clan-based structure that had characterised Caledonian society for centuries proved inadequate for coordinating resistance activities across wide geographical areas while maintaining operational security. New leadership hierarchies emerged based on demonstrated military effectiveness rather than hereditary status, though established chiefs retained influence through their control of resources and kinship networks. The emergence of specialised war leaders during this period represents a significant departure from traditional Caledonian political structures. These individuals, often younger men who had distinguished themselves in early raids against Roman targets, commanded authority based purely on military success rather than inherited position or druidical sanction. Archaeological evidence from smaller hill forts shows changes in internal organisation during this period, with prominent central structures replaced by more egalitarian arrangements that suggest flattened command hierarchies. Regional coordination between different tribal groups required new communication systems and diplomatic protocols that could function despite Roman efforts at interdiction and infiltration. The development of coded signal systems using smoke, fire and horn calls allowed rapid transmission of warnings and coordination of simultaneous operations across distances that would have required days for messenger travel. Archaeological evidence for these communication networks appears in the form of beacon sites positioned on prominent hilltops, with clear lines of sight to neighbouring positions. Economic adaptation proved equally crucial for sustaining prolonged resistance against Roman occupation forces. Traditional agricultural patterns that concentrated population in fertile valley bottoms became untenable due to Roman control of major river systems and road networks. Caledonian communities relocated to more marginal lands in upland areas where Roman patrols rarely ventured, accepting reduced agricultural productivity in exchange for enhanced security from military operations. The shift to pastoral economies based on cattle and sheep herding provided greater flexibility for communities under military pressure, as livestock could be moved rapidly to avoid Roman foraging expeditions, while providing essential protein and materials for warrior equipment. Archaeological evidence from high-altitude settlement sites shows increased emphasis on animal husbandry during this period, with specialised structures for livestock protection and evidence for expanded cheese and leather production that supported both local consumption and trade with other resistance communities. Trade patterns underwent fundamental restructuring as Roman control of major routes forced the development of alternative exchange networks through difficult terrain that Roman forces could not effectively patrol. These new trading relationships often followed ancient transhumance routes through mountain passes and along coastal waters, where small boats could transport goods between isolated communities. Archaeological evidence for this clandestine trade appears in the form of Roman coins and manufactured goods recovered from remote highland sites that could only have been accessed through unofficial channels. The impact of Roman goods on Caledonian material culture during this period reveals complex processes of selective adoption and cultural resistance. While Roman military equipment captured in raids provided superior weapons and armour for tribal warriors, domestic items like pottery and metalwork show continued adherence to traditional forms and decorative schemes. This pattern suggests deliberate cultural choices rather than simple technological adoption, with Caledonian communities maintaining their distinct identity while pragmatically utilising Roman military innovations. Fortification evolution during the Resistance period demonstrates sophisticated understanding of Roman siege techniques combined with innovative defensive concepts suited to guerrilla warfare. Traditional hill forts with massive stone ramparts proved vulnerable to Roman artillery and engineering expertise, leading to the development of smaller, more dispersed defensive positions that could be abandoned without significant loss if threatened by superior forces. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dinlagaide shows the construction of multiple small enclosures connected by concealed pathways, allowing defenders to conduct fighting withdrawals while maintaining communication between different defensive positions. The development of underground storage facilities and hidden weapon caches reflects careful planning for sustained resistance operations. Excavations at various highland sites have revealed sophisticated storage systems, including stone-lined pits sealed with clay and timber covers that protected essential supplies from both weather and Roman discovery. These installations often contained ironworking tools, finished weapons, and raw materials that could support small communities for extended periods without external resupply. Caledonian engineering innovations during this period included the development of portable defensive works that could be rapidly deployed to strengthen temporary positions. Archaeological evidence includes iron spikes designed for creating obstacles and narrow passes, portable shield walls constructed from interlocking wooden panels, and specialized tools for rapidly constructing field fortifications. These innovations reflect systematic analysis of Roman tactical methods and deliberate preparation for specific types of engagements. The psychological dimensions of guerrilla warfare proved as important as tactical innovations in maintaining Caledonian resistance morale while undermining Roman confidence in their northern conquests. Successful raids that inflicted casualties on Roman forces while avoiding decisive engagement demonstrated that the invaders remained vulnerable despite their technological advantages. The recovery of Roman military standards, officer equipment, and other prestigious items provided tangible proof of Caledonian military effectiveness, while serving as powerful symbols for recruitment and alliance-building efforts. Roman countermeasures against guerrilla warfare evolved through trial and error as frontier commanders developed new tactical doctrines suited to unconventional threats. The establishment of smaller, more numerous outposts replaced the traditional system of large fortresses separated by wide intervals, creating overlapping zones of control that complicated Caledonian movement while providing mutual support for threatened positions. Archaeological evidence from the Antonine frontier shows this evolution in Roman defensive thinking, with numerous small forts positioned to maintain visual contact while covering all major approach routes. The training of specialized anti-guerrilla units represented a significant innovation in Roman military practice during this period. These formations, typically composed of auxiliary troops with experience in similar terrain and warfare conditions, received additional training in tracking, small unit tactics, and operating independently from main force support. Archaeological evidence for their activities appears in the form of temporary camps and patrol bases positioned in remote areas where regular Roman forces rarely operated. Intelligence warfare became increasingly sophisticated as both sides developed networks of informants, double agents, and disinformation campaigns designed to mislead enemy planning efforts. Roman attempts to recruit Caledonian collaborators met with limited success due to the tight-knit nature of tribal society and the severe penalties imposed on suspected traitors. Conversely, Caledonian intelligence networks proved remarkably resilient to Roman countermeasures, suggesting sophisticated operational security procedures and compartmentalized information systems. The role of druids in maintaining resistance coordination extended far beyond their traditional religious functions to include military planning, intelligence coordination, and diplomatic negotiations with potential allies. Their extensive knowledge of tribal genealogies, territorial boundaries, and traditional laws provided essential expertise for resolving disputes between different resistance groups while maintaining unified opposition to Roman occupation. Archaeological evidence for continued druidical activity during this period includes ritual deposits in remote locations and the maintenance of traditional ceremonial sites, despite Roman efforts at suppression. The construction of Hadrian's Wall, beginning in 122 AD, fundamentally altered the strategic landscape of northern Britain, creating a permanent barrier that would define Romano-Caledonian relations for nearly 3 centuries. Emperor Hadrian's decision to establish this frontier reflected a broader imperial shift from expansion to consolidation, acknowledging the practical impossibility of conquering the Caledonian highlands while securing existing territorial gains through defensive infrastructure. The wall's construction required approximately 6 years and involved 3 legions working simultaneously across its 84-mile length, transforming the political geography of northern Britain in ways that extended far beyond its immediate military functions. The engineering specifications of Hadrian's Wall demonstrate the enormous resources Rome committed to controlling its northern frontier. The eastern sections, constructed primarily of dressed stone, rose to heights of 15 feet with an additional 6-foot parapet, while the western portions utilised turf and timber construction that could be rapidly erected using local materials. Archaeological excavations at Birdoswald have revealed the sophisticated foundation techniques employed by Roman engineers, including deep stone footings that extended below the frost line and drainage systems, designed to prevent water damage to the wall's structural integrity. The accompanying earthworks, including the Military Way Road and the Vallum Ditch system, created a complex defensive zone that channeled movement and provided multiple obstacles for potential attackers. The 16 major forts constructed along the wall's length housed approximately 9,000 troops drawn from auxiliary units recruited throughout the Roman Empire. Halstead's fort, excavated extensively during the 20th century, reveals the standardized layout employed at these installations, with barracks blocks arranged around a central headquarters building and commanding officers' residence. The fort's granaries could store sufficient supplies for 6 months of independent operations, while workshops for metalworking, leather processing, and equipment maintenance provided logistical self-sufficiency that reduced dependence on supply lines stretching back to York and beyond. The wall's construction immediately impacted traditional Caledonian territorial boundaries and seasonal movement patterns that had existed for centuries. Archaeological evidence from sites north of the frontier shows significant population displacement during the 120 SAD, with many hill forts abandoned as their inhabitants relocated to areas beyond Roman patrol range. The Votadini territory, previously extending from the Forth to the Tyne, found itself bisected by the new frontier, creating administrative complexities that Roman officials resolved through forced population transfers and territorial reorganisation. Trade relationships across the frontier evolved rapidly following the wall's completion, as Roman merchants and Caledonian traders adapted to new regulatory frameworks and security procedures. Archaeological deposits from Vindolanda reveal extensive commercial activity during this period, including imported pottery from Gaul, metalwork from the Rhineland, and luxury goods from across the Mediterranean world. Caledonian traders brought cattle, hides, slaves, and precious metals southward, while Roman goods including wine, olive oil, manufactured textiles, and military equipment flowed northward through carefully controlled crossing points. The establishment of regular markets at major wall forts created economic opportunities that attracted Caledonian merchants despite the political tensions surrounding Roman occupation. Inscriptional evidence from Corbridge describes negotiations between Roman officials and tribal representatives regarding trade privileges, toll payments, and security guarantees for merchants crossing the frontier. These commercial relationships required complex diplomatic protocols that acknowledged Caledonian political autonomy while establishing Roman authority over cross-border economic activity. Cross-border raiding patterns during the Hadrianic period reflect the sophisticated tactical adaptations Caledonian warbands developed in response to permanent Roman fortifications. Rather than attempting direct assaults against heavily defended positions, raiders focused on isolated settlements, supply convoys, and agricultural areas that lay beyond immediate fort protection. Archaeological evidence from civilian settlements near the wall shows increased fortification during this period, with villa complexes incorporating defensive features and civilian communities constructing refuge sites for use during Caledonian attacks. The seasonal timing of these raids demonstrates careful planning based on detailed intelligence about Roman military schedules and agricultural cycles. Most attacks occurred during late summer and early autumn when Roman garrisons were reduced due to harvest duties, and when Caledonian warriors could supplement their provisions with captured crops and livestock. The coordination required for simultaneous attacks across wide frontages indicates sophisticated communication networks and unified command structures that Roman intelligence consistently underestimated. Roman countermeasures against cross-border raiding evolved through experimentation with different tactical approaches and defensive strategies. The establishment of forward observation posts north of the wall provided early warning of Caledonian movements, while demonstrating Roman willingness to project power beyond the frontier line. Archaeological excavations at High Rochester reveal a substantial fort positioned 20 miles north of the wall, designed to interdict raiding parties before they could reach Roman territory, while serving as a base for punitive expeditions into Caledonian lands. The development of specialized pursuit units represented a significant innovation in Roman frontier warfare during this period. These formations, typically composed of auxiliary cavalry supported by light infantry, received training in tracking and small unit operations that enabled effective pursuit of raiding parties across difficult terrain. Their equipment emphasized mobility over protection, with archaeological evidence showing lighter armor configurations and specialized weapons suited to skirmishing rather than conventional battlefield engagements. Internal tribal politics within Caledonian society underwent significant transformation during the Hadrianic period as established leadership structures adapted to the challenges posed by permanent Roman presence. Traditional chiefs who had maintained their authority through successful raiding and warfare found their positions threatened by younger leaders who demonstrated greater effectiveness against Roman targets. Archaeological evidence from major hill forts shows changes in residential patterns during this period, with some sites showing evidence for violent destruction that may reflect internal power struggles rather than Roman military action. The emergence of new confederations during this period reflects both external pressure from Roman expansion and internal dynamics within Caledonian society. The Maiatai, first mentioned in classical sources during the late 2nd century, appear to represent a coalition of tribes from the central highlands who united in response to Roman territorial encroachment. Archaeological evidence for this confederation includes standardized weapon types and pottery styles that appear across a wide geographical area, suggesting coordinated production and distribution systems that required central organization. The Caledoni themselves underwent significant internal reorganization during this period, with archaeological evidence suggesting the consolidation of smaller tribal groups into larger political units capable of sustained resistance against Roman pressure. Excavations at Burghead in Moray reveal massive fortification works dating to this period, with stone ramparts enclosing an area of nearly 12 acres that could accommodate several thousand inhabitants. The site's strategic position controlling the Moray Firth suggests it served as a major political centre for the reorganised Caledonian Confederation. Shifting alliances between different tribal confederations reflect the complex diplomatic environment that characterised northern Scotland during the Antonine period. Roman intelligence reports describe negotiations between Caledonian leaders and tribes from Ireland and northern Gaul, suggesting efforts to create anti-Roman coalitions that extended beyond Britain. Archaeological evidence for these diplomatic contacts includes Irish metalwork recovered from Scottish sites and continental European artefacts that indicate sustained long-distance communication networks. The role of marriage alliances in cementing political relationships between different tribal groups became increasingly important as external pressure forced previously independent communities to seek mutual support. Archaeological evidence for these diplomatic marriages includes high-status female burials containing grave goods from multiple cultural traditions, suggesting women who served as links between different tribal groups. The distribution of these burials across wide geographical areas indicates systematic efforts to create kinship networks that could support military and political cooperation. Cultural preservation efforts during this period reveal deliberate strategies for maintaining Caledonian identity despite increasing Roman influence in surrounding regions. Archaeological evidence shows continued production of traditional pottery styles, metalwork designs and architectural forms that distinguish Caledonian material culture from Romanized British traditions. The persistence of these cultural markers suggests conscious resistance to Roman cultural influence rather than simple technological conservatism. The maintenance of traditional religious practices proved particularly important for preserving Caledonian cultural identity during this period of external pressure. Archaeological evidence from ritual sites shows continued use of ancient ceremonial locations, despite Roman efforts to suppress druidical activities. The Sculptor's Cave near Elgin contains deposits of human remains and metalwork dating to this period, suggesting the continuation of practices that may have included human sacrifice despite Roman prohibitions against such activities. Stone sculpture production during the Antonine period shows the development of distinctively Caledonian artistic traditions that incorporated selected Roman influences while maintaining indigenous symbolic systems. The emergence of symbol stones across northern Scotland during this period demonstrates sophisticated artistic workshops that produced monuments serving both religious and political functions. These carved stones typically feature combinations of abstract symbols, animal representations, and human figures that suggest complex symbolic systems understood within Caledonian society but largely opaque to Roman observers. The development of new settlement types during this period reflects adaptations to the security challenges posed by permanent Roman presence along the southern frontier. Nucleated villages replaced the dispersed farmsteads that had characterized earlier periods, providing enhanced security through concentrated population while maintaining agricultural productivity. Archaeological excavations at sites like Howe in Orkney reveal planned village layouts with defensive features integrated into residential areas, suggesting systematic reorganization of rural settlement patterns. Underground storage systems became increasingly sophisticated during this period as communities developed methods for concealing essential supplies from Roman foraging expeditions and punitive raids. The souterrains of northern Scotland, underground stone-built chambers accessible through concealed entrances, provided secure storage for grain, metalwork and other valuable materials. Archaeological evidence suggests these installations were constructed according to standardized designs that indicate coordinated planning and shared engineering knowledge across wide geographical areas. The intensification of iron production during this period reflects both military necessities and economic opportunities created by disrupted trade patterns. Archaeological evidence from sites like Taradale in Rossshire shows expanded metalworking facilities capable of producing weapons and tools for large populations. The development of specialized furnace designs that achieved higher temperatures while consuming less fuel demonstrates technological innovations that enabled increased production despite resource constraints imposed by warfare and territorial displacement. Textile production also expanded significantly during this period as communities sought to replace imported Roman goods with locally manufactured alternatives. Archaeological evidence includes increased numbers of loom weights, spindle whorls, and other textile working equipment at sites throughout the Highlands. The development of distinctive plaid patterns and weaving techniques during this period may reflect efforts to create visual markers of cultural identity that distinguish Caledonian communities from their Romanized neighbours. The evolution of weapon technology during the Antonine period shows continued adaptation to Roman military capabilities while maintaining traditional Celtic warfare preferences. Archaeological deposits reveal increased production of specialised anti-cavalry weapons, including long pikes and barbed javelins designed to counter Roman mounted units. The development of improved shield designs with iron reinforcement strips and bronze decorative elements demonstrates efforts to enhance protection while maintaining the mobility essential for guerrilla warfare tactics. The training of young warriors became increasingly systematized during this period, as communities recognized the need for specialized military skills to counter Roman tactical advantages. Archaeological evidence suggests the establishment of training areas within major hill forts, where young men could practice weapon skills and tactical maneuvers under the supervision of experienced fighters. The standardization of weapon types and fighting techniques across wide geographical areas indicates coordinated military instruction that transcended traditional tribal boundaries. The impact of Roman military pressure on Caledonian social structures extended beyond immediate military concerns to affect fundamental aspects of community organization and cultural transmission. Traditional age-grade systems that had regulated the transition from youth to adult status required modification to account for the military training necessary for effective resistance. Archaeological evidence suggests the emergence of warrior societies that cut across traditional clan boundaries while maintaining essential kinship relationships that provided social cohesion. The role of women in Caledonian society during this period appears to have expanded beyond traditional domestic functions to include military support activities and diplomatic roles. Archaeological evidence includes female burials with weapons and high-status goods that suggest some women achieved positions of military or political leadership. The classical sources describe female war leaders among northern British tribes, though the extent of women's participation in actual combat remains debated among scholars. The arrival of Emperor Septimius Severus in Britain during 208 AD marked the culmination of decades of deteriorating relations between Rome and the northern tribes, precipitated by increasingly bold Caledonian raids that had penetrated deep into the Roman province during the opening years of the 3rd century. Unlike previous campaigns that relied primarily on provincial garrisons and limited reinforcements, Severus committed the full weight of imperial resources to what he envisioned as the final solution to the northern problem. The emperor's personal presence, accompanied by his sons Caracalla and Geta, demonstrated unprecedented imperial commitment to completing the conquest that had eluded Roman arms for over a century. The military preparations for the Severan campaigns dwarfed all previous Roman operations in northern Britain, involving logistical planning that began months before the emperor's arrival. Archaeological evidence from York reveals massive expansion of the fortress's storage facilities during 208 AD, with new granaries capable of supporting an army estimated at 50,000 men for extended operations in hostile territory. The construction of additional workshops for weapon production, equipment repair, and siege engine construction indicates systematic preparation for a campaign of unprecedented scale and duration. Severus assembled forces drawn from across the Roman Empire, including veteran legions from the Rhine and Danube frontiers, whose experience in Germanic warfare provided valuable expertise for Highland operations. The Second Parthica Legion, recently returned from successful campaigns in Mesopotamia, brought specialized knowledge of siege warfare and desert operations that proved adaptable to Scottish conditions. Auxiliary units included Moorish-like cavalry, Germanic infantry, and Sarmatian heavy cavalry, whose diverse tactical capabilities provided flexibility unavailable to previous Roman commanders. The emperor's strategic approach differed fundamentally from earlier campaigns that had focused on achieving decisive battlefield victories through rapid penetration into enemy territory. Severus implemented a methodical advance supported by permanent fortifications and supply bases that could sustain operations regardless of seasonal weather conditions or enemy interdiction efforts. Archaeological evidence from temporary camps constructed during this period shows standardized designs capable of accommodating specific unit sizes while providing integrated defensive systems that reflected lessons learned from decades of frontier warfare. Roman engineering capabilities reached their zenith during the Severan campaigns, with construction projects that demonstrated the empire's technological superiority while serving immediate military objectives. The rebuilding of Hadrian's Wall in stone throughout its entire length eliminated the vulnerable turf sections that had required constant maintenance, while the addition of forward defensive works extended Roman control into previously contested territories. Excavations at Carpau on the Tay reveal a massive supply base constructed during this period, featuring stone-built warehouses, administrative buildings, and defensive works that indicate planning for permanent occupation rather than temporary military operations. The scale of Roman logistics during these campaigns required unprecedented coordination between military and civilian authorities throughout the province. Archaeological evidence from civilian settlements shows systematic requisitioning of supplies, transportation assets, and skilled labour that supported the massive military build-up. The construction of new roads and the improvement of existing routes facilitated rapid movement of troops and supplies while providing permanent infrastructure that would support continued Roman presence in conquered territories. Caledonian responses to intelligence reports of Roman preparations revealed the sophisticated political and military organisation that had evolved during decades of resistance warfare. The confederation assembled under the joint leadership of Argentacoxus of the Caledonii and an unnamed war chief of the Maeotai represented the most extensive tribal alliance ever achieved in northern Britain. Archaeological evidence from major hill forts during this period shows intensive weapon production and food storage activities that indicate systematic preparation for sustained resistance against overwhelming odds. The coordination required for effective Caledonian resistance involved complex negotiations between tribal groups whose traditional territories spanned the entire highland region from the Forth to the far north. Archaeological evidence suggests the establishment of standardized weapon designs and tactical procedures that transcended traditional tribal boundaries, indicating central coordination of military planning and resource allocation. The distribution of similar pottery styles and metalwork across wide geographical areas during this period reflects the logistical networks necessary for supporting large-scale military operations. Caledonian defensive preparations incorporated lessons learned from previous encounters with Roman forces while adapting traditional Highland warfare techniques to counter the superior numbers and equipment of the Severan expedition. Rather than concentrating forces in major hill forts that could be isolated and besieged by Roman engineers, tribal leaders dispersed their warriors among numerous smaller strongholds that could provide mutual support while avoiding decisive engagement with superior Roman formations. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dunlegaide shows modifications to existing defences that emphasise concealment and rapid evacuation rather than prolonged resistance. The development of coordinated intelligence networks enabled Caledonian leaders to monitor Roman movements and coordinate their responses across the entire theatre of operations. These information systems relied heavily on civilian populations who maintained normal agricultural activities while secretly observing Roman installations and troop movements. The effectiveness of these networks becomes apparent through analysis of Roman casualties during the campaigns, which consistently occurred in locations where Caledonian forces had achieved tactical surprise through superior intelligence. The opening phase of the Severan campaigns during the summer of 208 AD demonstrated the overwhelming superiority of Roman logistics and engineering capabilities when properly supported and coordinated. Roman forces advanced simultaneously along multiple axes, constructing permanent fortifications at regular intervals while maintaining secure supply lines that could not be effectively interdicted by Caledonian raiders. The speed of this advance, documented through archaeological evidence from temporary camps, exceeded all previous Roman penetrations into Highland territory. Roman tactical innovations during this campaign reflected careful analysis of previous failures and systematic adaptation to Highland warfare conditions. The extensive use of auxiliary units in advance guard and flanking roles reduced Roman dependence on heavy infantry formations that had proven vulnerable to Caledonian ambush tactics. Archaeological evidence from battle sites during this period shows increased deployment of missile weapons, including artillery pieces that could provide suppressive fire during river crossings and assault operations. The brutal nature of Roman operations during the Severan campaigns exceeded all previous levels of violence and destruction inflicted upon Caledonian communities. Archaeological evidence from civilian settlements throughout the Highlands shows systematic destruction during this period, with burned buildings, scattered human remains, and abandoned tool caches that indicate hasty evacuation under military pressure. The scale of this destruction suggests deliberate Roman policy aimed at eliminating the economic base that supported Caledonian resistance, rather than simply defeating enemy military forces. Roman scorched earth tactics during these campaigns targeted agricultural resources, livestock and food storage facilities that sustained highland communities through winter months. Archaeological evidence from granary sites shows systematic destruction of stored grain supplies, while animal bone deposits indicate large-scale slaughter of cattle and sheep that represented generations of accumulated wealth. These operations forced Caledonian populations to choose between starvation and submission, representing a fundamental shift from traditional Roman preferences for incorporating conquered peoples into the imperial system. The psychological impact of Roman destructive capabilities extended far beyond immediate material losses to undermine the social and cultural foundations of Caledonian society. The systematic destruction of religious sites and ceremonial centres demonstrated Roman contempt for traditional beliefs, while eliminating the physical locations where tribal assemblies had traditionally gathered. Archaeological evidence from sites like the Sculptor's Cave shows deliberate defacement of carved symbols and ritual deposits, indicating Roman understanding of the cultural significance of these locations. Caledonian military responses to Roman scorched earth tactics required fundamental adaptations to traditional warfare methods and social organisation. The dispersal of populations into remote areas where Roman forces could not effectively operate necessitated abandonment of traditional settlement patterns and agricultural practices. Archaeological evidence from high-altitude sites during this period shows temporary occupation by large numbers of refugees who lacked the resources for permanent settlement but required protection from Roman military operations. The coordination of Caledonian resistance across such wide geographical areas, while maintaining operational security against Roman intelligence efforts, demonstrates remarkable organisational capabilities and leadership skills. The survival of resistance networks despite intensive Roman efforts at infiltration and disruption indicates sophisticated counterintelligence procedures and compartmentalised command structures that limited the damage caused by captured personnel or compromised operations. Seasonal warfare patterns during the Severan campaigns reflected both Roman logistical constraints and Caledonian tactical adaptations to sustained military pressure. Roman forces typically initiated major operations during late spring when improved weather conditions facilitated movement of heavy equipment and supplies, while Caledonian responses followed complementary patterns designed to maximise the effectiveness of limited resources against overwhelming odds. Archaeological evidence suggests coordinated Caledonian attacks during winter months when Roman forces were concentrated in permanent bases and vulnerable to supply interdiction. The impact of prolonged warfare on Roman military effectiveness became increasingly apparent as the campaigns extended through multiple seasons without achieving decisive results. Archaeological evidence from Roman military hospitals shows increasing numbers of casualties from disease and exhaustion, rather than combat wounds, indicating the toll imposed by sustained operations in difficult terrain and hostile climate conditions. The replacement of veteran units with fresh troops from other frontiers suggests significant degradation of Roman combat effectiveness, despite tactical successes. Roman engineering efforts during the later phases of the campaign focused on establishing permanent control over conquered territories through construction of roads, bridges, and fortified positions that could support continued occupation. The massive fortress at Carpau represents the most ambitious of these projects, designed to serve as the administrative centre for a new province that would encompass all of northern Scotland. Archaeological evidence from this site shows planning for civilian settlement and economic development that indicates Roman confidence in achieving permanent conquest. The diplomatic dimensions of the Severan campaigns involve complex negotiations between Roman officials and tribal representatives regarding terms for submission and integration into the imperial system. These discussions typically occurred during winter months when active military operations were suspended, providing opportunities for both sides to assess their strategic positions and explore alternatives to continued warfare. Archaeological evidence suggests some tribal groups accepted Roman terms during this period, though the extent of genuine submission versus tactical accommodation remains debated. The death of Septimius Severus at York in February 211 AD fundamentally altered the strategic situation by removing the driving force behind Roman commitment to northern conquest. His sons Caracalla and Geta lacked both the military experience and political authority necessary for continuing such massive military operations, while their mutual hostility prevented effective coordination of imperial policy. Archaeological evidence from Roman installations north of Hadrian's Wall shows systematic abandonment beginning immediately after Severus's death, indicating rapid policy changes that prioritized other imperial concerns over northern conquest. The withdrawal of Roman forces from advanced positions during 211-212 AD provided Caledonian survivors with opportunities to reoccupy traditional territories and begin reconstruction of their shattered communities. Archaeological evidence from major hill forts shows renewed occupation during this period, though at significantly reduced population levels that reflect the devastating impact of the Severan campaigns. The recovery of abandoned Roman equipment and supplies provided essential resources for rebuilding, while demonstrating the incomplete nature of Roman victory despite tactical superiority. Peace negotiations following the Roman withdrawal involved complex diplomatic protocols that acknowledged Caledonian autonomy while establishing Roman authority over cross-border relations and trade activities. These agreements typically included provisions for hostage exchanges, tribute payments, and restrictions on military activities that could threaten Roman interests. Archaeological evidence suggests these arrangements remained largely theoretical, as both sides lack the resources and political stability necessary for effective enforcement of negotiated terms. The long-term impact of the Severan campaigns on Caledonian society extended far beyond immediate military casualties and material destruction to affect fundamental aspects of political organisation and cultural identity. The massive population displacement and economic disruption caused by Roman operations accelerated existing trends toward political centralisation, while forcing adaptation of traditional social structures to new environmental and demographic realities. Archaeological evidence suggests the emergence of new leadership hierarchies based on demonstrated effectiveness in resistance warfare, rather than traditional hereditary qualifications. The transformation of Caledonian identity into what classical sources would increasingly recognise as Pictish culture emerged gradually during the 4th and 5th centuries AD, representing not a sudden political revolution but rather the culmination of centuries of cultural evolution accelerated by external pressures and internal innovations. The designation Picti, the painted ones, first appeared in Roman panegyrics around 297 AD, though the artistic and military traditions it described had been developing within Caledonian society for generations. Archaeological evidence from major settlement sites reveals continuity in material culture and settlement patterns that demonstrates this transformation represented cultural intensification rather than wholesale replacement of existing populations. The political structures that emerged during this transitional period reflected sophisticated adaptations to the challenges posed by renewed Roman military pressure under the Tetrarchy, combined with increasing maritime raids from Irish and Saxon groups that threatened traditional Caledonian territories from multiple directions. The confederation system that had characterized earlier resistance efforts evolved into more centralized kingdoms capable of coordinating defensive operations across wide geographical areas while maintaining the clan-based social structures that provided military recruitment and local administration. Archaeological evidence from sites like Berghead reveals massive fortification projects that required coordinated labour from multiple tribal groups, indicating political authority sufficient to mobilise resources on unprecedented scales. The emergence of recognisable Pictish kingdoms during the 4th century involved complex processes of territorial consolidation that built upon earlier Caledonian foundations while adapting to new strategic realities. The northern Picts, centred in territories extending from the Mouth to Caithness, developed political institutions that combined traditional clan leadership with innovative administrative structures capable of supporting permanent military forces and specialised craft production. Archaeological excavations at Rhynie in Aberdeenshire have revealed a major political centre dating to this period, featuring high-status residences, specialised workshops, and defensive works that indicate substantial population concentration and economic activity. The southern Picts, occupying territories between the Forth and the Grampian Mountains, faced different challenges due to their proximity to both Roman frontier zones and emerging Anglo-Saxon settlements in southeastern Scotland. Their political organisation emphasised military effectiveness and diplomatic flexibility, with archaeological evidence suggesting more frequent changes in leadership and territorial boundaries than occurred in northern regions. The fortress complex at Dundurn in Perthshire shows evidence for multiple construction phases during this period, with defensive modifications that reflect changing military threats and tactical innovations. Symbol stone production represents perhaps the most distinctive artistic achievement of emerging Pictish culture, combining indigenous Celtic artistic traditions with innovative symbolic systems that served both religious and political functions. The earliest examples, classified as Class 1 stones by modern archaeologists, feature incised symbols carved into natural rock surfaces or roughly shaped monoliths. These symbols include abstract geometric designs, animal representations, and objects that appear to reference specific individuals, events, or territorial claims. The distribution of similar symbol combinations across wide geographical areas suggests standardized symbolic languages that transcended local tribal boundaries while maintaining regional variations in artistic execution. The technical sophistication of Pictish stone carving during this period demonstrates the existence of specialized workshops and trained craftsmen whose skills were transmitted through formal apprenticeship systems. The precision of incised lines and the consistency of proportional relationships between different symbolic elements indicate the use of measuring devices and standardized design templates. Archaeological evidence from sites like Tarbet in Ross-shire reveals stone carving workshops with specialized tools including iron chisels, bronze compasses, and stone grinding equipment that enabled the production of monuments requiring weeks or months of skilled labour. The symbolic vocabulary employed on Class 1 stones incorporates elements drawn from multiple cultural traditions while developing distinctively Pictish iconographic conventions. Animal symbols include representations of bulls, boars, stags, eagles, salmon, and dolphins that may reference clan totems, territorial boundaries, or seasonal ceremonial cycles. Abstract symbols such as the crescent and V-rod, double disc and Z-rod, and various geometric combinations appear to function as personal or dynastic emblems that identified specific individuals or family groups. The consistent association of particular symbol combinations across different sites suggests these monuments served legal or commemorative functions within Pictish society. Metalworking traditions during the early Pictish period demonstrate remarkable continuity with earlier Caledonian craftsmanship, while incorporating new techniques and decorative motifs that reflected changing cultural preferences and external influences. Archaeological deposits from major settlement sites reveal sophisticated bronze working capabilities that produced both utilitarian objects and high-status ceremonial items. The development of distinctive penannular brooches with elaborate terminal decorations shows the integration of Germanic and Celtic artistic influences within indigenous production traditions. The production of silver chains and massive armlets during this period indicates access to precious metal sources and the existence of wealthy patrons capable of commissioning expensive luxury goods. The Whitecloak chain from Lanarkshire, though discovered outside core Pictish territory, demonstrates the technical capabilities of northern British metalworkers during this period. The chain consists of over 100 individual links, each decorated with intricate geometric patterns that required specialised tools and considerable skill to execute. Similar examples from Pictish contexts suggest these objects served ceremonial functions related to political authority and social status. Weapon production during the transitional period shows continued emphasis on traditional Celtic forms, combined with tactical adaptations designed to counter new military threats. Archaeological evidence reveals increased production of long-bladed swords suitable for mounted combat, reflecting the growing importance of cavalry in Pictish military organisation. The development of specialised spearheads with pronounced wings or lugs indicates adaptation to fighting techniques that emphasise thrusting attacks and weapon retention during close combat. Shield construction incorporated iron reinforcement strips and bronze decorative elements that provided both functional protection and visual display of warrior status. The warrior culture that characterised Pictish society placed enormous emphasis on personal combat skills and the display of martial prowess through distinctive appearance and equipment. Classical descriptions of Pictish warriors emphasise their practice of body painting or tattooing with elaborate designs that may have identified clan affiliations, military achievements, or spiritual protection. Archaeological evidence for these practices remains limited due to the organic nature of pigments and tattooing materials, though the recovery of specialised needles and pigment grinding equipment from settlement sites suggests these traditions were widespread and technically sophisticated. Pictish warrior equipment during this period combined practical military effectiveness with elaborate decorative schemes that demonstrated both individual wealth and cultural identity. Archaeological evidence from weapon burials reveals swords with silver inlaid hilts, spears with bronze or silver ferules, and shields decorated with bronze bosses featuring complex geometric patterns. The standardization of certain decorative motifs across wide geographical areas suggests coordinated production systems and shared aesthetic preferences that transcended local tribal boundaries. The development of specialized warrior societies within Pictish culture provided institutional frameworks for military training, equipment maintenance, and the transmission of tactical knowledge. Archaeological evidence suggests these organizations operated across traditional clan boundaries while maintaining distinct initiation rituals and membership requirements. The recovery of matching sets of weapons and personal ornaments from different sites indicates systematic distribution of equipment to society members, while the consistency of burial practices suggests shared religious beliefs and ceremonial traditions. Territorial consolidation during the 4th and 5th centuries involved complex processes of negotiation, conquest, and alliance formation that established the geographical boundaries of major Pictish kingdoms. The Northern Kingdom, with its centre of power in the Moray Firth region, controlled territories extending from the Great Glen to the Pentland Firth, including the Northern Isles, where distinctive artistic traditions developed in relative isolation from mainland influences. Archaeological evidence from sites like the Brugh of Beersay reveals substantial settlement activity during this period, with evidence for specialised craft production and long-distance trade connections. The southern Pictish kingdom encompassed territories between the Forth and the Mount, including the fertile agricultural lands of Fife, Angus, and the Mearns that provided economic foundations for political consolidation. The strategic importance of this region, with its river valleys providing access routes into the highlands and its coastal plains supporting substantial populations, made it a focal point for military activity and political competition. Archaeological evidence from a major hill forts like Dundurn shows evidence for multiple phases of construction and modification that reflect changing political circumstances and military threats. Military innovations during this period reflected both traditional Caledonian warfare techniques and adaptations designed to counter new types of threats from maritime raiders and expanding Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. The development of coastal fortifications and signal systems indicates systematic preparation for seaborne attacks, while the construction of inland defensive work suggests continued concern about land-based military operations. Archaeological evidence from sites like Burghead reveals sophisticated defensive planning that incorporated multiple lines of fortification with integrated communication systems and supply storage facilities. The adoption of cavalry as a major component of Pictish military forces represents a significant departure from traditional Celtic infantry-based warfare, reflecting both tactical innovations and social changes within warrior culture. Archaeological evidence for horse equipment includes bridle bits, harness fittings, and specialised weapons designed for mounted combat. The construction of larger residential structures within major settlements may reflect the need to accommodate horses and their equipment, while changes in settlement layouts suggest adaptation to cavalry-based military organisation. Naval capabilities became increasingly important as Pictish kingdoms faced maritime threats from Irish raiders and emerging Anglo-Saxon naval forces operating from bases in eastern England. Archaeological evidence for shipbuilding activities includes specialised woodworking tools, iron ship fittings, and harbour installations that indicate substantial investment in naval capabilities. The development of fortified harbours and coastal watchtowers demonstrates systematic preparation for naval warfare and the protection of maritime trade routes. The integration of diverse cultural influences within Pictish artistic traditions reflects the complex political and economic relationships that characterised northern Scotland during this transitional period. Irish artistic motifs appear in metalwork and stone carving, suggesting diplomatic contacts and possible intermarriage between royal families. Germanic influences, possibly transmitted through contact with Anglo-Saxon kingdoms or continental European trade networks, appear in weapon designs and personal ornaments. These foreign elements were selectively incorporated within indigenous artistic traditions, rather than wholesale adoption of external styles. Religious practices during the early Pictish period combined traditional Celtic beliefs with Christian influences that arrived through Irish missionary activity and contact with Romanised British communities. Archaeological evidence suggests the continuation of traditional ritual practices at natural sites like springs, groves and hilltops, while the construction of new ceremonial centres indicates evolving religious institutions. The symbol stones themselves may have served religious functions related to ancestor veneration, territorial claims, or seasonal ceremonial cycles that maintained community cohesion and cultural identity. The role of Druids within Pictish society appears to have evolved significantly during this period, with their traditional functions as judges, teachers, and ritual specialists adapted to serve the administrative needs of emerging kingdoms. Archaeological evidence suggests the continuation of specialized training centers, where young men received instruction in law, genealogy, and ritual practices essential for political leadership. The preservation of oral traditions through memorization and recitation remained crucial for maintaining cultural continuity despite external pressures and internal political changes. Settlement patterns during the Pictish emergence period show significant evolution from earlier Caledonian traditions while maintaining fundamental organizational principles based on kinship groups and territorial control. The development of nucleated villages replaced many dispersed farmsteads, providing enhanced security and facilitating specialized craft production. Archaeological evidence from sites like Howe in Orkney reveals planned settlement layouts with integrated defensive features and specialized activity areas that indicate central planning and coordination. The construction of souterrains reached its peak during this period, with underground storage chambers becoming increasingly sophisticated in design and construction. These installations provided secure storage for grain, metalwork, and other valuable materials while serving potential refugee functions during military emergencies. The standardization of souterrain construction techniques across wide geographical areas suggests coordinated planning and shared engineering knowledge that transcended local tribal boundaries. Agricultural intensification during this period supported larger populations while providing economic foundations for political consolidation and military expansion. Archaeological evidence shows expansion of cultivated areas into previously marginal lands, improvement of drainage systems, and development of new crop varieties suited to highland conditions. The construction of field systems with stone boundaries indicates permanent land tenure arrangements and investment in long-term agricultural productivity. The development of specialized craft production centers enabled Pictish kingdoms to achieve economic self-sufficiency while producing luxury goods for trade and diplomatic exchange. Archaeological evidence from sites like Rhynie reveals workshops for metalworking, stone carving, and textile production that operated at scales requiring coordinated labor and resource allocation. The standardization of production techniques and decorative motifs across different workshops suggests centralized control over craft activities and quality standards. Trade networks during the Pictish emergence period extended across northern Europe while maintaining connections with Mediterranean commercial systems through British and Irish intermediaries. Archaeological evidence includes imported pottery from Gaul, amber from the Baltic region, and silver coins from Byzantine and Frankish sources. The development of standardized weight systems and the production of distinctive Pictish silver chains suggests sophisticated commercial practices and monetary systems that facilitated long-distance trade relationships. The consolidation of Pictish political authority during the 6th century witnessed the emergence of powerful kingdoms that transformed the scattered tribal confederations of earlier centuries into centralized monarchies capable of projecting military force across vast territories and maintaining diplomatic relations with emerging powers throughout Britain and Ireland. The establishment of the Northern Kingdom centred on the fertile land surrounding the Moray Firth, and the Southern Kingdom, controlling the strategic river valleys between the Forth and the Grampian Mountains, represented the culmination of political developments that had been evolving since the collapse of effective Roman authority in northern Britain. Archaeological evidence from Burghead reveals the scale of royal authority during this period, with massive defensive works enclosing nearly 12 acres of fortified settlement that required coordinated labour from thousands of workers over multiple construction seasons. The site's triple rampart system, constructed using vitrified stone techniques that fused granite blocks into impenetrable barriers, demonstrates engineering capabilities that could only have been marshalled through centralized political control. Within these defences, excavations have uncovered workshops for bronze casting, iron smithing and stone carving that produced luxury goods and ceremonial objects distributed across wide geographical areas as symbols of royal patronage and political alliance. The emergence of high kings who claimed authority over multiple subordinate rulers reflects the adoption of hierarchical political structures that drew inspiration from both Irish and Anglo-Saxon models while maintaining distinctively Pictish characteristics. These paramount rulers established their authority through successful military campaigns, strategic marriage alliances, and the patronage of religious institutions that provided legitimacy for their expanded territorial claims. Archaeological evidence from major royal centres shows the construction of impressive residential complexes featuring stone-built halls capable of accommodating hundreds of retainers during ceremonial gatherings and political assemblies. Succession practices within Pictish kingdoms followed matrilineal principles that distinguished them from the patrilineal systems employed by neighbouring Celtic and Germanic peoples. Royal authority passed through the female line, with kings typically succeeded by their sisters' sons rather than their own male offspring. This system created complex genealogical networks that connected ruling families across different kingdoms while providing multiple potential claimants for vacant thrones. Archaeological evidence for these succession practices appears in the form of royal burial sites that include high-status female interments with regalia and grave goods indicating their crucial role in legitimizing political authority. The practical implementation of matrilineal succession required sophisticated record-keeping systems that track genealogical relationships across multiple generations and geographical regions. Pictish nobles maintained detailed oral traditions that preserved the lineages of royal women and their offspring, with specialized bards and genealogists responsible for memorizing and reciting these crucial political documents during succession disputes and ceremonial occasions. The symbol stones produced during this period may have served as permanent records of these genealogical claims, with specific symbol combinations identifying particular royal lineages and their territorial rights. Royal centres during the mature Pictish period combined residential, administrative, and ceremonial functions within fortified complexes that demonstrated both military power and cultural sophistication. Excavations at Rhynie have revealed a major royal site featuring multiple phases of construction spanning several centuries, with evidence for specialized workshops, storage facilities, and residential areas that housed substantial populations of craftsmen, warriors, and administrative personnel. The discovery of imported pottery, glass vessels, and metalwork from continental Europe indicates these centres served as focal points for long-distance trade networks that brought luxury goods and exotic materials to Pictish royal courts. The architectural sophistication of Pictish royal halls reflects both practical requirements for accommodating large retinues and symbolic needs for displaying royal magnificence to visiting dignitaries and subject populations. These timber-built structures typically measured over 30 metres in length and featured elaborate decorative schemes that incorporated carved stone panels, bronze fittings, and painted wall surfaces. Archaeological evidence from sites like Forteviot reveals post-hole patterns indicating halls with internal divisions that provided private quarters for royal families while maintaining large communal spaces for feasting and ceremonial activities. Luxury goods recovered from royal sites demonstrate the wealth and cultural connections of Pictish monarchs during this period of political consolidation. Silver chains of extraordinary craftsmanship, featuring hundreds of individually decorated links connected by elaborate terminal rings, represent the pinnacle of Pictish metalworking achievement, while serving as symbols of royal authority and diplomatic exchange. The White chain, though discovered outside core Pictish territory, exemplifies the technical mastery achieved by royal workshops, with each link requiring hours of skilled labour to complete the intricate geometric patterns that covered every surface. Personal ornaments worn by Pictish royalty combine traditional Celtic artistic motifs with innovative decorative schemes that reflected both cultural continuity and political evolution. Massive silver armlets, some weighing over 2 kilograms, provided visible displays of wealth while serving ceremonial functions during royal inaugurations and diplomatic negotiations. The development of distinctive penannular brooches with elaborate zoomorphic terminals demonstrates the integration of Irish artistic influences within indigenous Pictish traditions, suggesting cultural exchange through intermarriage between royal families and diplomatic contact with Irish kingdoms. The establishment of royal workshops within major political centres enabled Pictish monarchs to control the production of prestige goods while ensuring consistent quality and symbolic content in items used for diplomatic exchange and reward of loyal supporters. Archaeological evidence from these workshops includes specialised tools for metalworking, stone carving and manuscript illumination that required years of training to master. The standardisation of decorative motifs and technical procedures across different royal centres suggests coordinated training programmes and the movement of skilled craftsmen between different kingdoms under royal patronage. Weapon production under royal patronage achieved unprecedented levels of technical sophistication and artistic elaboration during this period. Pictish swords featured pattern-welded blades with complex geometric designs created through the forge welding of iron and steel bars, while hilts incorporated silver inlay work and organic materials, including horn, bone and precious wood. Spearheads developed distinctive angular profiles with pronounced ridges that provided both functional advantages in combat and visual markers of Pictish military identity. Shield construction incorporated bronze bosses decorated with intricate interlace patterns that required specialised casting techniques and finishing procedures. The development of royal armies during this period involved fundamental changes in military organisation and recruitment that reflected the expanded territorial scope of Pictish kingdoms. Traditional clan-based warbands remained important for local defence and raiding operations, but royal forces required professional warriors who could serve extended campaigns away from their home territories. Archaeological evidence suggests the establishment of permanent military retinues housed within royal centres, with specialised barracks buildings and equipment storage facilities that supported standing forces numbering in the hundreds. Military innovations during the mature Pictish period included the adoption of heavy cavalry that required substantial investment in horse breeding, equipment production, and tactical training. The construction of larger stable facilities within royal centres indicates systematic development of mounted forces, while the production of specialised cavalry weapons and armour demonstrates adaptation to new forms of warfare. The influence of continental European military practices appears in weapon designs and tactical formations that suggest contact with Frankish and other Germanic military traditions through trade and diplomatic exchange. Naval capabilities became increasingly important as Pictish kingdoms sought to control maritime trade routes and defend against seaborne raiders from Ireland, Scandinavia, and Anglo-Saxon England. Archaeological evidence for royal naval installations includes harbour fortifications, shipbuilding facilities, and specialised storage areas for naval equipment and supplies. The development of distinctive Pictish ship designs, incorporating both Celtic and Germanic construction techniques, enabled effective operations in the challenging waters surrounding Scotland, while providing platforms for both military and commercial activities. Territorial expansion through conquest and diplomacy created complex administrative challenges that required new forms of governmental organisation beyond traditional tribal structures. Pictish kings appointed regional governors who represented royal authority in distant territories while maintaining local connections through marriage and kinship ties. These administrative positions provided opportunities for advancement within Pictish society while ensuring royal control over tax collection, military recruitment, and judicial proceedings in outlying regions. The integration of conquered territories involved careful balance between imposing royal authority and respecting local traditions that had governed these regions for centuries. Archaeological evidence suggests Pictish rulers typically maintained existing settlement patterns and agricultural systems while introducing new ceremonial centres and defensive works that demonstrated royal presence. The construction of royal hunting lodges and seasonal residences in newly acquired territories provided opportunities for monarchs to maintain personal contact with local populations, while enjoying the recreational opportunities these regions provided. Diplomatic relations with neighbouring kingdoms required sophisticated understanding of international politics and the maintenance of permanent diplomatic establishments that could negotiate complex agreements regarding territorial boundaries, trade privileges, and military cooperation. Pictish royal courts maintained ambassadors at major centres throughout Britain and Ireland, while hosting foreign representatives who negotiated on behalf of their own rulers. Archaeological evidence for these diplomatic activities includes imported luxury goods, foreign coins, and exotic materials that arrived through diplomatic exchange rather than commercial trade. Marriage alliances between Pictish royal families and neighbouring dynasties served crucial political functions, while creating kinship networks that extended across ethnic and territorial boundaries. These diplomatic marriages typically involved elaborate ceremonies that demonstrated royal wealth and cultural sophistication, while cementing political agreements through personal relationships. Archaeological evidence for royal weddings includes specialised ceremonial objects, imported luxury goods, and architectural modifications to royal residences that accommodated foreign guests and their retinues. The patronage of religious institutions provided Pictish monarchs with powerful tools for legitimising their authority, while extending royal influence into spiritual and cultural spheres. The establishment of royal monasteries and the endowment of existing religious communities created networks of clerical supporters who promoted royal interest through their preaching and teaching activities. Archaeological evidence from monastic sites shows royal patronage through the construction of elaborate churches, the donation of precious liturgical objects, and the provision of extensive landed endowments that supported monastic communities. Christian conversion among Pictish royal families occurred gradually during the 6th and 7th centuries, through contact with Irish missionaries and British clergy, who brought both religious instruction and literacy skills that enhanced royal administrative capabilities. The adoption of Christian symbolism in royal art and ceremonial objects demonstrates the integration of new religious concepts within existing cultural frameworks rather than wholesale abandonment of traditional beliefs. Symbol stones from this period show the gradual incorporation of Christian crosses and biblical scenes alongside traditional Pictish symbols and secular imagery. The development of written records within Pictish royal administrations represents a fundamental shift from purely oral traditions toward documentary systems that could support more complex governmental functions. The adoption of Latin literacy through Christian education provided royal clerks with tools for maintaining tax records, legal documents, and diplomatic correspondence that enhanced administrative efficiency, while creating permanent archives of governmental activity. Archaeological evidence for these developments includes writing materials, seal matrices, and documentary fragments that demonstrate the growing importance of written communication in royal administration. Legal systems under Pictish monarchy combined traditional Celtic customary law with new royal legislation that addressed the needs of expanded territorial kingdoms. Royal courts served as final arbiters in major legal disputes, while local assemblies continued to handle routine matters according to traditional procedures. The development of specialized legal officials who interpreted royal law and maintained court records created professional administrative classes that served royal interests while providing career opportunities for educated individuals from non-royal backgrounds. Economic policies implemented by Pictish monarchs included the standardization of weights and measures, the regulation of markets and trade routes, and the collection of taxes and tribute that supported royal administration and military forces. Archaeological evidence for these economic activities includes standardized weights, official seals, and specialized storage facilities that indicate systematic approaches to revenue collection and resource management. The development of royal mints that produce silver coins demonstrates sophisticated understanding of monetary systems and their role in facilitating both domestic and international commerce. The construction of royal roads and bridges facilitated communication between different parts of Pictish kingdoms, while demonstrating royal commitment to infrastructure development that benefited both military and civilian populations. These engineering projects required substantial labour forces and technical expertise that could only be mobilised through centralised political authority. Archaeological evidence includes stone-built bridges, paved road surfaces, and milestone markers that indicate systematic approaches to transportation infrastructure that enhanced royal control over distant territories. Cultural patronage by Pictish monarchs extended beyond religious institutions to include support for secular artistic production, scholarly activities, and entertainment that enhanced royal prestige while preserving and developing Pictish cultural traditions. Royal courts maintained professional poets, musicians, and storytellers who created and performed works celebrating royal achievements while preserving historical traditions and genealogical records. The development of distinctive Pictish artistic styles in metalwork, stone carving, and manuscript illumination reflects royal patronage of skilled craftsmen who worked exclusively for royal and ecclesiastical clients. The emergence of royal burial traditions during this period demonstrates the development of elaborate ceremonial procedures that reinforced royal authority while providing opportunities for displaying dynastic wealth and cultural sophistication. Royal burial sites feature stone-built chambers containing grave goods that include weapons, jewellery, ceremonial objects, and imported luxury items that demonstrate both personal wealth and international connections. The construction of elaborate memorial monuments over royal graves created permanent markers of dynastic authority that served both religious and political functions for subsequent generations. The ascension of Kenneth MacAlpin to the throne of the Picts in 843 AD marked the culmination of centuries of political evolution that would transform the fragmented kingdoms of northern Scotland into the unified realm of Alba. Kenneth's claim to Pictish kingship through his mother's lineage represented the final triumph of matrilineal succession principles that had governed Pictish royal inheritance for generations, while his simultaneous rule over the Scots of Dalriada demonstrated the complex diplomatic and military manoeuvring that characterised 9th century Scottish politics. Archaeological evidence from Forteviot, where Kenneth established his principal royal residence, reveals massive construction projects undertaken during his reign, including the expansion of existing defensive works and the construction of new ceremonial buildings that could accommodate the enlarged royal court required for governing the expanded kingdom. The political unification achieved under Kenneth MacAlpin involved careful integration of existing Pictish administrative structures with Scottish governmental traditions, creating hybrid institutions that preserve local autonomy while establishing centralised royal authority. The retention of Pictish territorial divisions and local officials ensured continuity in tax collection and judicial proceedings, while the appointment of Scottish nobles to key positions within the royal administration created new networks of loyalty that transcended traditional ethnic boundaries. Archaeological evidence from major administrative centres shows continued occupation and expansion during this transitional period. indicating successful preservation of existing governmental infrastructure rather than wholesale replacement of Pictish institutions. The military challenges that facilitated Kenneth's rise to power included devastating Viking raids that had weakened both Pictish and Scottish kingdoms throughout the early 9th century. The sack of Iona in 795, 802, and 806 AD had forced the relocation of the Columban monastery's treasures and manuscripts to Kells in Ireland, while repeated attacks on coastal settlements disrupted traditional trade networks and forced population movements inland. Archaeological evidence from sites like St Andrews shows hasty fortification works constructed during this period, with earthen ramparts and timber palisades built around existing ecclesiastical centres to provide protection against seaborne raiders who could strike without warning along the extensive Scottish coastline. Kenneth's response to the Viking threat involved strategic innovations that drew upon both Pictish and Scottish military traditions, while adapting to the new tactical challenges posed by highly mobile raiding forces. The establishment of inland strongholds positioned beyond the reach of Viking longships provided secure bases for coordinating defensive operations, while the development of rapid response forces capable of intercepting raiding parties before they could return to their ships demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Viking operational methods. Archaeological evidence from royal fortresses constructed during this period reveals specialised facilities for maintaining cavalry forces and storing the equipment necessary for sustained military campaigns against maritime raiders. The cultural synthesis that emerged under Kenneth's reign reflected deliberate policies aimed at creating unified Scottish identity while preserving valuable elements of both Pictish and Scottish traditions. Royal patronage of artistic production encouraged the development of hybrid decorative styles that combined Pictish symbol stone traditions with Scottish manuscript illumination techniques, creating distinctive alba artistic forms that would influence Scottish cultural expression for centuries. The St Andrews sarcophagus, carved during the late 8th or early 9th century, demonstrates this cultural fusion through its combination of traditional Pictish hunting scenes with Christian iconography and decorative motifs drawn from Northumbrian and Irish sources. Archaeological evidence for cultural continuity during the transition to Alba appears most clearly in settlement patterns and material culture that show gradual evolution rather than sudden transformation. Excavations at major Pictish centres like Rhynie reveal continued occupation and development throughout the 9th century, with building techniques and artefact assemblages showing incremental changes that reflect cultural adaptation rather than population replacement. The persistence of traditional craft production methods, particularly in metalworking and stone carving, indicates the survival of skilled artisan communities who adapted their techniques to serve new royal patrons while maintaining essential technical knowledge. The preservation of Pictish elements within emerging Scottish identity involved conscious efforts to maintain cultural practices and symbolic systems that had served important social and political functions within Pictish society. Symbol stones continued to be erected throughout the 9th and 10th centuries, though their iconographic programs gradually incorporated Christian themes while retaining traditional Pictish symbols and artistic conventions. The Class II stones produced during this period demonstrate sophisticated artistic workshops that combine traditional stone carving techniques with new decorative programs that reflected the changing religious and political landscape of unified Scotland. The linguistic transformation that accompanied political unification involved complex processes of language contact and gradual replacement that varied significantly across different regions and social classes. Gaelic, the language of the Scottish royal court, gradually became the dominant language of political and religious administration, while Pictish survived in local contexts for several generations before disappearing from the historical record. Archaeological evidence for this linguistic transition appears in the form of inscriptions and place names that show Gaelic influence spreading gradually from royal centres and ecclesiastical sites into rural areas where traditional Pictish communities maintained their local languages for extended periods. The integration of Pictish and Scottish ecclesiastical traditions created new forms of Christian practice that combined Irish monastic influences with indigenous Scottish religious customs and Pictish ceremonial traditions. The establishment of St Andrews as the principal ecclesiastical centre of the unified kingdom involved the conscious creation of a new religious identity that could serve both Pictish and Scottish populations while providing legitimacy for the MacAlpin dynasty. Archaeological excavations at St Andrews have revealed extensive building programs during the 9th century, including the construction of new churches and monastic buildings that could accommodate the expanded religious community required for serving the unified kingdom. The economic integration of formerly separate kingdoms required careful coordination of existing tribute systems, trade networks, and resource allocation mechanisms that had developed independently over centuries of separate political evolution. Kenneth's administration maintained traditional Pictish methods for collecting taxes and tribute while introducing Scottish practices for managing royal estates and controlling long-distance trade. Archaeological evidence from major economic centres shows continued prosperity during the transition period, with evidence for expanded craft production and increased long-distance trade that indicates successful economic integration rather than disruption caused by political change. Agricultural intensification during the 9th century supported the larger populations and more complex administrative structures required for governing the unified kingdom. Archaeological evidence shows expansion of cultivated areas into previously marginal lands, improvement of drainage systems in low-lying areas, and development of new storage facilities that could support larger communities during periods of poor harvests or military emergency. The construction of mills and other agricultural processing facilities indicates investment in infrastructure that enhance productivity while providing additional sources of royal revenue through milling fees and other agricultural taxes. Territorial consolidation under Kenneth MacAlpin involved complex negotiations with neighbouring kingdoms and the establishment of new frontier defences that could protect the expanded realm from external threats. The southern boundary with Northumbria required particular attention due to ongoing conflicts between Scottish and Anglo-Saxon forces over control of strategic river valleys and fortress sites. Archaeological evidence from border regions shows intensive fortification activity during this period. With the construction of new defensive works and the strengthening of existing fortifications that could provide early warning of enemy movements while serving as bases for Scottish military operations. The development of royal administrative centres throughout the unified kingdom required substantial investment in infrastructure and the training of personnel capable of implementing royal policies across diverse populations with different cultural traditions and local customs. The establishment of regional administrative centres at sites like Scone, Perth and Stirling provided focal points for royal authority, while maintaining connections to local populations through existing kinship networks and traditional leadership structures. Archaeological evidence from these centres reveals substantial building programs that created facilities for housing royal officials, storing administrative records, and conducting the judicial proceedings that maintained royal authority throughout the kingdom. Maritime defences became increasingly important as Viking raids continued to threaten Scottish coastal communities throughout the 9th century, despite political unification. The development of coastal fortifications and early warning systems enabled more effective responses to seaborne threats, while the construction of harbours and naval facilities provided bases for Scottish ships that could intercept Viking raiders before they reached vulnerable coastal settlements. Archaeological evidence from coastal sites shows systematic fortification efforts that created integrated defensive networks capable of coordinating responses to maritime threats across wide geographical areas. The preservation of Pictish legal traditions within the unified Scottish legal system ensured continuity in local judicial procedures while establishing royal authority over major legal disputes and criminal proceedings. Traditional Pictish assemblies continue to function at local levels, handling routine legal matters according to customary procedures that had governed these communities for generations. Archaeological evidence for these legal institutions includes assembly sites and specialised buildings that serve judicial functions, demonstrating the successful integration of different legal traditions within the expanding Scottish governmental system. Cultural exchange between formerly separate populations accelerated during the 9th century as political unification created new opportunities for interaction between Pictish and Scottish communities. Intermarriage between noble families from different ethnic backgrounds created kinship networks that transcended traditional boundaries while facilitating cultural transmission and adaptation. Archaeological evidence for this cultural mixing appears in burial practices that combine elements from different traditions, settlement patterns that show integrated communities, and material culture that reflects hybrid cultural identities. The development of new ceremonial traditions that could serve the unified kingdom required careful balance between maintaining respect for existing customs and creating new rituals that reflected the changed political circumstances. Royal inauguration ceremonies incorporated elements from both Pictish and Scottish traditions, while introducing new symbolic elements that emphasised the unity of the expanded kingdom. Archaeological evidence for these ceremonial innovations includes specialised ceremonial objects and architectural features that served ritual functions within royal centres and major ecclesiastical sites. Artistic patronage under the MacAlpin dynasty encouraged the development of distinctive Alba artistic traditions that would influence Scottish cultural expression for centuries. Royal workshops produced manuscripts, metalwork and stone sculpture that combined technical excellence with innovative iconographic programs reflecting the cultural synthesis achieved through political unification. The Book of Kells, though produced in Ireland, demonstrates the artistic capabilities of Celtic workshops during this period and provides insight into the sophisticated artistic traditions that influenced Scottish cultural development. The legacy of Caledonian resistance to Roman expansion became an important element in the emerging Scottish national identity, providing historical precedents for independence and military effectiveness that served the political needs of the MacAlpin dynasty. Medieval chroniclers drew upon oral traditions and written sources to create historical narratives that emphasise the continuity between ancient Caledonian warriors and contemporary Scottish military achievements. Archaeological evidence supports some elements of these historical accounts while revealing the complex processes of cultural transmission that preserved selected aspects of ancient traditions within evolving Scottish cultural identity. The transformation of Pictish symbol stone traditions during the 9th and 10th centuries demonstrates the gradual adaptation of ancient cultural practices to serve new political and religious functions within the unified kingdom. Later symbol stones show increasing Christian influence, while maintaining traditional Pictish artistic techniques and symbolic vocabularies, creating hybrid monuments that serve both religious and political functions. These stones continue to mark territorial boundaries, commemorate important individuals, and provide focal points for community identity while adapting to the changing cultural landscape of Alba. By the end of the 9th century, the political, cultural and economic integration achieved under Kenneth MacAlpin and his successors had created a unified Scottish kingdom that successfully preserved valuable elements of Pictish civilization, while establishing new institutions capable of governing diverse populations across extensive territories. The archaeological record demonstrates remarkable continuity in settlement patterns, craft production, and cultural practices that ensured the survival of Caledonian traditions within the evolving Scottish identity. The resistance strategies developed during centuries of conflict with Roman expansion provided tactical knowledge and cultural resilience that enabled Scottish kingdoms to maintain independence against Viking raiders, Anglo-Saxon expansion, and later English attempts at conquest. The emergence of Alba represented not the end of Caledonian civilization, but its successful transformation into new political and cultural forms that would continue to influence Scottish development throughout the medieval period and beyond. The matrilineal succession principles that had governed Pictish royal inheritance, the artistic traditions that had created the symbol stones, the military techniques that had resisted Roman conquest, and the cultural values that had sustained Highland communities through centuries of external pressure, all found expression within the unified Scottish kingdom that emerged from the political genius of Kenneth MacAlpin and the cultural synthesis he achieved between formerly separate peoples who shared common origins in the ancient Caledonian tribes that had first faced Roman legions at Mons Graupius over 7 centuries earlier.